It was Christmas Eve 2003 in a small town outside of Syracuse, New York. The kind of place where the snow sits on rooftops for weeks, where the main street is empty by 6, and everyone knows everyone else's business. I was 25 and working as a paramedic for the local volunteer squad, and that year's Christmas had been quiet up until around 10 o'clock at night. The roads were slick, but nothing unusual. Until the call came. The dispatch said there had been a domestic disturbance at a farmhouse on County Road 14, the kind of call paramedics normally ignore until law enforcement secures the scene. But the dispatcher sounded uneasy, her voice tight, almost panicked, and the sheriff's office had told her there wouldn't be deputies available for at least 30 minutes. She asked if we could check it. The house belonged to the Miller family. I knew them by sight. Robert Miller worked at the local sawmill, and his wife, Linda, was a nurse. They had 2 kids, 8 and 6, and every year the family went all out decorating. Their front yard was usually glowing with lights, inflatable Santas, reindeer. It was ridiculous, but charming. That night, though, when we turned onto the farm lane, there were no lights, only snow, deep, crusted, and undisturbed. As we drove up the lane, I noticed footprints in the snow. At first, I thought they were from the family's dogs, but they were too large and uneven, too long, barefoot, deep, deliberate prints leading up to the front porch and then circling the house. I turned to my partner, Mike, and whispered, "This isn't normal." He nodded, his face pale under the glow of the truck's dashboard. "Let's just check it and get out." The front door was ajar. I drew my flashlight, announcing ourselves, but no one answered. Inside, the house smelled off. Not like a house with pets or old wood. Something metallic. I felt my stomach knot. The living room was intact. Tree in the corner, presents neatly stacked, but the ornaments were broken, scattered across the floor. One of the kids' toys was crushed under a chair. "Mom? Dad?" I called. No response. We moved through the house, checking each room. In the kitchen, the oven was on. A pot was boiling over, bubbling a thick, dark liquid. That wasn't what stopped me, though. It was the table. Plates set as if dinner had been interrupted, but each plate had something unrecognizable. Meat, torn and bloody, raw in places. Mike stepped back. "Jesus Christ." I didn't respond. Instead, I noticed the back door swinging slightly. Snow blowing in, footprints leading from the door into the yard. And then I heard it, the faintest scraping noise, like fingernails on wood, coming from the basement. We didn't have to look at each other to know the next step. Flashlights ready, I descended first, Mike right behind me. The basement smelled like iron. Something moved in the corner. I thought it was a shadow at first. Then I saw her. Linda Miller was sitting against the far wall. Her hair was matted, her nightgown torn and blood-stained. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Her hands rested on her lap, but they weren't empty. I couldn't believe what I saw. Fingers, small and pale, bent in unnatural angles, protruded from her palms. They weren't her children's, at least not entirely, but I recognized them. Pieces of the bodies of her children stacked neatly next to her. I stumbled back, gagging. Mike drew his radio to call dispatch. "They're awake," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. "They're watching. They always watch." Before we could respond, a low scraping started from above. We froze. Bare, enormous feet, long enough to reach across the stairs, thudded against the floorboards. The children's laughter, high-pitched, warped, echoed down. Not normal children's laughter. Something distorted, inhuman. Mike grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now." We ran up the stairs, but the door at the top slammed on its own. I tried to force it open. Nothing. Something pushed against it from the other side. I could hear its breathing, slow, wet, deliberate. We kicked out a window. Snow blew in. I felt something grab my ankle. Cold. Human? Not human? I don't know. I kicked and pulled myself free, dragging Mike after me. Outside, snow fell in blinding sheets. There were footprints, dozens, circling the house, leading into the forest behind it. One of them stepped into the light for a second. Tall. Too tall. Skin pale, stretched tight, arms long enough to touch the ground. Its face, wrong. No nose. Mouth wide with teeth jagged and sharp. Eyes black, shining in the truck's headlights. Linda Miller screamed from inside the house. Her voice sounded normal, human, but layered underneath it was a shriek, like the sound of 100 birds being torn apart. Then she vanished. The door was empty. The lights on the porch flickered and went out. Only the snow reflected any light, and the shapes in it moved, faster than we could comprehend, toward the woods. We didn't stop until we hit the main road. Dispatch and deputies arrived shortly after, but when they went back with a full team, the house was empty. Linda Miller, Robert, the kids, gone. Not a trace except the raw remains in the basement and the footprints leading into the forest. No one found them. They never returned. The sheriff closed the case as family tragedy, likely due to mental illness. The local paper ran a small story about a missing family, but the town remembers. Every Christmas Eve, there are reports. Lights deep in the woods, screams carried across the frozen fields, shapes moving at the edge of yards, dogs howl, vanish, or refuse to come inside. Children in nearby homes whisper about tall, pale men standing outside, watching through windows. Every year, I get a call. Someone reports broken ornaments, footprints in the snow, chairs overturned. And every year, I drive those back roads alone, hoping it's nothing, knowing better. A few years ago, I swore I saw something at the tree line of my own yard. Bare, impossibly long limbs. Watching. Waiting. I went inside. Locked the doors. But I still hear it, the scratching, the laughter, every Christmas Eve. I quit responding to calls on Christmas after that. I quit decorating. I don't put lights on my house. And yet every year, I check the windows before bed because I know they're still out there, tall, waiting, remembering, hungry, and patient. Story, the end. I never planned to talk about what happened that Christmas. For years, I tried to fold it away like an old decoration you swear you'll throw out but keep stuffing back into the box. But some nights, when the air smells like pine and cold metal and the lights outside flicker just a little too slow, I can feel it pressing against the back of my skull. I can hear the sound again, the sound that ended Christmas for me forever. It was December 23rd, 2008, in a small town in northern Michigan. The kind of place where the snowbanks stay until April and everyone waves, even if they don't like you. I was 26, home from Chicago after losing my job, sleeping in my childhood bedroom under the same glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 10. My parents were thrilled to have me back for the holidays. My younger sister Emily was visiting too, 8 months pregnant and glowing in that tired, hopeful way first-time mothers get. The storm came in fast that year. Lake effect snow slammed into town late on the 22nd, knocking out power to half the county. Our house sat on the edge of a wooded area, and by the time the sun set on the 23rd, we were completely cut off. No power, no cell service. The landline crackled and died just after dinner. Dad wasn't worried. He grew up here. He lit the fireplace, dragged out the old kerosene lanterns, and joked about Christmases from his childhood when they'd had to melt snow for water. Mom made soup on the gas stove and put Bing Crosby on the old battery-powered radio. It felt cozy in that forced, old-fashioned way, like we'd slipped backward in time. Emily went to bed early. She said the baby was restless. I remember teasing her, saying the kid just wanted to be born on Christmas. She smiled, but there was something tight behind her eyes. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound I thought was the wind. A low, steady thumping, like something heavy hitting the side of the house. I lay there listening, counting the seconds between the thuds. Too regular to be branches. Too deliberate. Then I heard screaming. Emily's room was across the hall. I bolted up, the cold floor shocking my feet, and yanked open her door. She was sitting upright in bed, hands gripping her stomach, face slick with sweat. "It's time," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Mom and Dad were there seconds later, panic blooming fast in the lantern light. The roads were impassable. The phones were dead. Emily's contractions were close together, too close. Dad tried the truck anyway, shoveling for nearly an hour before admitting what we all knew. We were on our own. The screaming came back while Dad was outside. This time it wasn't Emily. It came from the woods. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakably human. A woman, maybe. Long, ragged cries that rose and fell, full of terror. Mom froze, one hand on Emily's shoulder. We listened. Another scream cut through the night, closer this time. Someone was out there. Dad came in, red-faced and breathless. He heard it too. We argued. He said it could be someone hurt in the storm, maybe a car off the road. Mom said it could be an animal or someone drunk. Emily begged him not to go. She was crying now, fear and pain tangled together. The next scream ended the debate. It was right behind the house. Dad grabbed the shotgun from the hall closet. I pulled on boots and my coat. I don't know why. I just couldn't stay inside. The cold hit like a slap when we opened the back door. Snow whipped sideways, stinging my face. Dad's flashlight beam cut through the dark in shaky arcs. We followed the sound into the trees. The woods behind our house weren't deep, just a stretch of pines and scrub before the old logging road. But that night they felt endless. The screaming turned into sobbing, then into something else. A wet, choking sound that made my stomach turn. We found her near the creek. She was lying on her side in the snow, hair frozen to her face, coat torn open. Blood soaked the ground beneath her, dark and steaming. She was alive, barely. Her eyes rolled toward us, unfocused. "He's still out there," she whispered. Then she died. Dad checked for a pulse anyway, his hands trembling. I stood there useless, the flashlight shaking so badly the beam danced across the trees. That was when we heard footsteps. Not running. Walking. Slow. Heavy. Dad raised the shotgun and yelled. The footsteps stopped. For a moment there was nothing but the wind and the crackle of ice in the trees. Then a man stepped into the light. He was tall, bundled in a heavy parka, face hidden behind a knit mask. Snow clung to his shoulders. He raised his hand slowly, palms out. "Help me," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. "My wife is hurt." Dad didn't lower the gun. "We just found her," he said. "She's dead." The man's shoulders sagged. He let out a sound that might have been a sob. "Oh God," he said. "Oh God." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe this was a horrible accident, that we'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. Then the man smiled. It was visible even through the mask, the way his cheeks lifted, the way his eyes crinkled. He lunged forward. Dad fired. The blast lit up the woods, deafening. The man dropped, screaming, clutching his leg. Blood sprayed the snow. We ran. I don't remember getting back to the house. I remember slipping on the steps, Dad hauling me up by the collar, Mom's face white with terror when we burst through the door. Emily was screaming again, louder now. The man's screams followed us, drifting through the trees, turning into laughter that made my skin crawl. Dad barricaded the doors with furniture. He reloaded the shotgun with shaking hands. Mom tried to focus on Emily, but she kept glancing toward the windows, flinching at every sound. The lights flickered. Then the power came back on. For a moment, relief washed through me. Heat hummed in the vents. The Christmas lights outside blinked to life. The radio crackled, and then every light in the house went out at once. Not just off, shattered. Bulbs burst in a cascade of popping glass. The Christmas tree went dark. The radio died mid-song. Something slammed into the front door. Once, twice. The wood bowed inward. Dad fired through the door. The shotgun blast tore a hole clean through. There was a grunt, a curse. Then silence. We waited. Minutes stretched. Emily sobbed, begging us to help her, begging us to make it stop. The back door crashed open. He was inside. He moved fast, impossibly fast for someone with a shattered leg. He swung something heavy, catching Dad in the chest. I heard ribs crack. Dad went down hard, gasping. Mom screamed. The man turned toward her, lifting the hammer high. I grabbed the fireplace poker and swung with everything I had. It connected with his shoulder. He barely reacted. He backhanded me across the face. The room spun. I tasted blood. He grabbed Mom by the hair and dragged her toward the kitchen. She clawed at the floor, screaming my name. The sound cut off abruptly. Emily's room was the only place left to run. I slammed the door behind me, shoved the dresser in front of it. Emily was half off the bed now, blood soaking the sheets. The man's footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. "Please," Emily cried. "Please, I'm pregnant." He laughed on the other side of the door. So was my wife. The door splintered. Wood cracked. The dresser shifted. I don't remember making the decision. I just acted. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and smashed the window. Cold air rushed in. Snow blew across the room. I pulled Emily toward the window. She screamed in pain. The door burst open. The man lunged. The baby came. It was chaos. Blood and screaming and the sound of glass breaking. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how we got out. I remember falling into the snow, dragging Emily behind me, hearing the man shouting, slipping and crawling, and not caring how much it hurt. We reached the neighbor's house just as dawn broke, pounding on the door with bloody hands. The police came. Ambulances, search teams. They found Dad's body in the living room. Mom was in the kitchen, throat cut. The man was gone. They found his wife's car days later, abandoned near the logging road. Her body was in the trunk. She'd been alive when she was put in there. They never caught him. Emily's baby survived. A girl. She was born on Christmas Eve. Every year when the snow starts to fall and the lights come on, I think about the sound of those footsteps in the woods. I think about the smile behind the mask, and I wonder if somewhere out there he's still walking, listening for screaming, waiting for Christmas to come again. Story the end. I never believed the phrase true Christmas horror until the winter my brother disappeared. Even now, years later, I hesitate to tell the story because every time I do, something small but wrong seems to happen afterward. A light that won't turn off, a door found unlocked, a voicemail that plays static before cutting out. Still, what happened wasn't a dream or a ghost story passed around for fun. It was documented, investigated, and quietly buried by people who didn't want the truth lingering into the holidays. My brother Ethan went missing on December 23rd in rural Pennsylvania. He was 32, steady job, no history of mental illness, no drugs, no reason to vanish. He drove snowplows for the county and knew those back roads better than anyone. He was supposed to be home by midnight. By morning, his truck was found abandoned on a closed stretch of road near a state forest. I was the one who went looking for him. The sheriff tried to stop me, saying search teams were already involved, but I knew Ethan. He wouldn't just leave his truck, and he definitely wouldn't ignore my calls. I drove out there Christmas Eve afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds and the air smelling like snow. Every radio station was playing cheerful music that felt deeply wrong against the silence of the woods. Ethan's truck was still there when I arrived, smirque, half buried in snow. Engine cold, driver's door open. His jacket lay on the passenger seat, folded neatly, like he'd planned to come right back. His boots, however, were gone. That detail didn't make sense to anyone except me. Ethan never went anywhere in winter without his boots. Ever. I stepped out of my car and called his name. The sound vanished into the trees. The forest was thick and dark, branches sagging under snow, the ground uneven and scarred by frozen streams. There were no footprints leading away from the truck. None. Not his, not anyone else's. It was as if he'd been lifted straight up into the air. I noticed something else then, marks in the snow near the rear of the truck. Not footprints. Long, shallow lines like something heavy had been dragged, then suddenly stopped. Search teams combed the area for 2 days, dogs were brought in, drones flew overhead, nothing turned up, no scent trail, no clothing, no blood. No sign Ethan had ever left that road. On Christmas morning, the sheriff told my parents they were transitioning from rescue to recovery. The words sounded hollow. My mother didn't cry, she just sat very still, staring at the tree we decorated together years before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Ethan's jacket on the seat, folded just right. It bothered me. He wasn't neat like that, never had been. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. From Ethan. The timestamp read 1:47 a.m. My hands shook as I pressed play. At first, there was nothing but wind, then faint crunching like footsteps in snow. Ethan's breathing followed. Fast. Panicked. "Something's wrong," he whispered. I didn't hit anything. I swear I didn't." A pause. "I see lights. They're not headlights." His voice cracked. There was a sound behind him then, low and rhythmic, like something knocking wood against wood. "I think it wants me to come closer," he said quietly. "It sounds like bells." The message cut off. I replayed it until my phone died. The sheriff dismissed it as a delayed voicemail, maybe sent earlier when Ethan was stressed. But I heard something in the background that no one else seemed to notice. A second set of breathing, slow and steady, not human. Against everyone's advice, I went back to the forest that afternoon. Snow had fallen again, erasing the search tracks. The woods looked untouched, pristine, and deeply hostile. I followed the road until I reached the spot where Ethan's truck had been found. That's when I saw it. A trail. Not footprints, indentations, evenly spaced, like something tall had walked through without breaking stride. They led off the road and into the trees. I followed. The air grew colder the deeper I went, unnaturally so. My breath fogged thick and white, and my ears rang with silence. No birds. No wind. Just the crunch of snow beneath my boots. After about 20 minutes, I smelled something foul. Rotting meat mixed with pine sap. It made my eyes water. That's when I found the clearing. In the center stood a shape that made my brain struggle to understand what it was seeing. At first glance, it looked like a crude Christmas display, sticks lashed together into a tall frame draped with tattered red cloth. But as I stepped closer, the truth came into focus. They weren't sticks, they were bones, human bones. Dozens of them, tied together with wire and strips of fabric. Skulls stared outward, some cracked, some missing jaws. Old clothing hung from the structure, coats, scarves, hats, frozen stiff with age and weather. At the top hung a set of antlers, massive and real, darkened with something that wasn't rust. I stumbled back, nearly falling. Then I heard it. Bells. Soft at first, then louder. They came from behind me. I turned slowly. Something tall stood at the edge of the clearing. Too tall. Its body was thin, wrapped in layers of torn cloth and fur. Its limbs bent the wrong way, joints popping as it moved. Its head was crowned with antlers, but beneath them was no animal's face. Just a pale, stretched human mask pulled tight over something that writhed underneath. It smelled like decay and cold iron. It raised one long arm, and I saw fingers, too many of them ending in blackened nails. From its chest came the sound of breathing. Two rhythms. One was Ethan's. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes as I crashed through the forest, heart hammering, lungs burning. The bells followed, never rushing, never fading. I tripped, rolled down a slope, and slammed into something solid. A tree. No, metal. Ethan's snowplow blade. I scrambled up. Ethan stood there, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, eyes glassy, lips blue. He wore no boots, his feet raw and blackened from frostbite. Wire cut into his wrists, pulling his arms upward like a puppet. His mouth opened. "Don't listen," he croaked. "It learns your voice." The bells rang sharply. The thing stepped into view behind him. It pulled once. Ethan screamed. Not in pain, but terror, and his body went limp, head lolling forward. I don't remember how I got away. I don't remember reaching the road or my car. I only remember driving until my vision blurred and my hands went numb on the steering wheel. I told the police everything. They searched again. They found nothing. No clearing. No bones. No trail. Ethan's voicemail disappeared from my phone without explanation. Phone records showed no call was ever made. The official report says Ethan wandered off, confused, and succumbed to the elements. Every year since, on Christmas Eve, I hear bells outside my house. Soft ones. Patient ones. And sometimes when the snow is deep and the night is quiet, I hear my brother's voice calling my name from just beyond the tree line. Story the end. The first thing the detective asked me was why I waited so long to talk. I didn't have a good answer then. I still don't. All I know is that every Christmas since it happened, the smell comes back first. Pine sap, wet wool, and something coppery underneath it all. Blood has a smell, even when it's old, especially when it's old. This happened in northern Pennsylvania, outside a town small enough that people still wave at cars they don't recognize. My family owned a Christmas tree farm there. Not one of the commercial places with cash registers and hot cocoa machines, just 40 acres of uneven hills and evergreens that my grandfather planted after he came back from Korea. We cut trees for locals and let folks wander in December, saws in hand, to pick their own. We trusted people back then. Christmas Eve of 2006 was bitter cold, the kind that burns your lungs when you breathe too deep. My parents had gone into town for last-minute groceries, leaving me and my younger cousin Tyler to finish closing up the shed. Tyler was 16, loud and restless, always talking about leaving as soon as he graduated. I was 19 and thought I already knew everything. We were halfway through locking up when we heard the screaming. At first, I thought it was wind whipping through the trees. Evergreens make strange noises when ice builds up on their branches. But then it came again, high-pitched, panicked, human. Tyler froze. "Did you hear that?" We stood there, listening. The sound came again, closer now, and unmistakably a woman's voice. "Help! Please!" We ran. The farm had a trail system winding through the trees, marked with faded red ribbons. Snow covered most of it, but the footprints were easy to follow. Erratic, deep gouges where someone had stumbled and fallen. We followed them downhill to a clearing where a minivan sat half buried in a snowbank, its rear tires spinning uselessly. A woman stood near the driver's door, her coat unzipped, hair plastered to her face with sweat despite the cold. Two kids were inside the van, maybe 8 and 10, crying and pounding on the windows. "Thank God," she gasped when she saw us. "My phone's dead. We slid off the road. Please, can you help us?" We told her we'd get the truck and tow her out. She kept thanking us, her hands shaking. Something about her eyes bothered me, though. They kept flicking toward the trees like she expected something to step out. Tyler ran back up the trail to get our pickup. I stayed with the woman and the kids. She said her name was Laura, that they were driving to her parents' house for Christmas. She wouldn't say where they were coming from. Every time I asked, she'd trail off and look into the woods again. The kids had stopped crying now. They stared at me through the glass, their faces pale and silent. I waved, trying to smile, but neither waved back. That's when I heard it. A low crunching sound, slow and deliberate. Footsteps. "Did you bring someone else?" Laura whispered. I shook my head. The footsteps circled the clearing, just beyond the tree line. Whoever it was didn't come into view. They moved carefully, as if taking their time. "Maybe it's a neighbor," I said, though my stomach had started to knot. Laura grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "We have to leave. Now." Before I could respond, a figure stepped out from between the trees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a red coat trimmed with white fur. Not a costume, at least not a cheap one. The fabric was thick, darkened in places like it had soaked up moisture. His boots left deep impressions in the snow as he walked forward. The beard was real, gray, matted, clotted with ice. His face was red from the cold, eyes watery and unfocused, like he hadn't slept in days. "Evening," he said. His voice was rough, cracked. "Trouble?" Laura let go of my arm and took a step back. "Please," she said. Just let us go." The man smiled, slow and crooked. "It's Christmas Eve," he said. "No one should be stranded." I didn't like how he said it, like he was repeating something he'd heard somewhere, not something he believed. Tyler came barreling into the clearing with the truck, headlights blazing. The man flinched at the sudden light, but didn't move away. Tyler leaned out the window. "You folks need a pull?" Laura didn't answer. She was staring at the man in the red coat, her mouth open, eyes wide with something like recognition. The man turned his head slowly toward Tyler. In the headlights, I could see dark stains on the front of his coat. They weren't snow melt. "Plenty of room out here," he said. "Plenty of trees." Something shifted behind him just for a second. A shape between the trunks, another red coat, then another. I remember shouting Tyler's name. I remember Laura screaming again, louder than before. I remember one of the kids inside the van pressing their face against the glass, their mouth open in a silent scream. Everything after that comes in pieces. Hands grabbing me from behind, dragging me down into the snow. Tyler swinging a tire iron, hitting something solid that didn't fall. The sound of metal against bone. The smell, God, the smell, blood and pine sap mixing into something sweet and rotten. I saw one of the men, no, not men, there were too many of them, grab Tyler by the collar and slam his head against the side of the truck. I saw Laura run, only to be tackled 10 feet from the van. I heard one of the kids start screaming again, high and shrill, and then cut off abruptly. I don't know how long I lay there, face pressed into the snow, pretending to be dead. Long enough for the sounds to stop, long enough for the footsteps to fade back into the trees. When I finally crawled to my feet, the clearing was quiet. The van door hung open. Inside, there was blood on the seats, smeared handprints on the windows. The kids were gone. Tyler was on the ground near the truck, his eyes open, staring at nothing. His chest wasn't moving. I ran to the road and didn't stop running until I saw headlights. The police searched the farm for days. They found Laura's body buried shallowly beneath a tree, her coat torn, her hands bound with twine. They never found the kids. They said maybe the attackers took them, maybe they ran and got lost. They said a lot of things. They never found the men in red coats. The official story blamed transients, drifters passing through. They suggested the red coats were a coincidence, maybe someone wearing a Santa costume because of the season. No one wanted to think about something more organized, something ritualistic. The farm shut down after that. My parents sold the land. Tyler's family moved away. People stopped cutting their own trees and started buying plastic ones from big box stores. The woods grew thick and wild again. I tried to forget. But last year, 23 years after that night, my sister sent me a photo. She'd taken her kids to a new Christmas tree lot outside town, set up on land that used to belong to my grandfather. The trees were pre-cut now, lined up in neat rows. In the background of the photo, just beyond the edge of the lot, stood a group of men. They were watching. All of them wore red coats trimmed with white fur. I called her immediately. She laughed it off, said they were probably workers or people dressed up for the holidays. She told me I was being paranoid. Maybe I am. But last night, Christmas Eve again, I was driving past that same stretch of road when I saw a minivan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. A man stood nearby, waving for help. He wore a red coat. Story the end. Christmas Eve of 2003 was the coldest I can remember in southern Illinois. The weather report said the wind chill was already below zero by sunset, but that didn't stop people from traveling. It never does. Everyone believes Christmas will protect them somehow, that nothing truly bad can happen on a night meant for warmth and family. I believed that too. I was 27 then, recently divorced, living alone in a small rental house outside a dying river town. Most people only pass through on their way north. I worked security at a grain processing facility, the kind of job that paid just enough to keep you tired and quiet. That year, I'd drawn the short straw and had to work Christmas Eve overnight, midnight to 8 a.m. The place shut down operations for the holiday, so my job was just to sit in a heated guard shack by the main gate and log anything unusual. I brought leftovers, a thermos of coffee, and a portable radio tuned to a station playing old Christmas songs on repeat. By 11:45 p.m., the snow had started coming down hard. Thick flakes fell straight out of the sky, sticking to everything. The lights around the facility made the snowfall look endless, like being trapped inside a shaken snow globe. At midnight, I clocked in, locked the gate, and settled into the chair. The first 2 hours were quiet. No traffic, no movement except the wind rattling the chain-link fence. Around 2:15 a.m., I noticed headlights on the access road. That alone wasn't strange. Occasionally, a trucker would get lost, or someone would turn around after realizing the plant was closed. But these headlights didn't move. They just sat there, aimed directly at the gate. I watched them for a minute, waiting for the vehicle to pull forward or back up. It didn't. The engine stayed running. The lights stayed on. I grabbed my radio and stepped outside, boots crunching in the snow. The cold hit me hard, biting straight through my coat. I walked closer, raising a hand to shield my eyes from the glare. It was a sedan, old, late 90s maybe, dark red, almost black under the snow. The driver's door was open. No one was inside. The engine idled roughly, coughing like it might stall. Snow piled up on the hood and roof, untouched by any recent movement. The driver's seat was empty. No footprints led away from the car. None approached it either, just smooth, untouched snow all around. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the open space. No answer. I checked the inside of the car. The keys were still in the ignition. A half-wrapped Christmas present sat on the passenger seat. Red paper. A green bow. There was a woman's purse on the floor, open, with its contents spilled out as if dumped in a hurry. My stomach tightened. I radioed the situation into dispatch. They told me to stay put and that a sheriff's deputy would be sent out to investigate. Given the weather, it might take a while. I shut off the engine, closed the door, and locked the car. Then I went back to the guard shack, trying to convince myself the driver had wandered off to relieve herself or something equally harmless. But the radio didn't help. Every Christmas song suddenly felt mocking. I turned it off and sat in silence, eyes fixed on the dark road beyond the gate. At 3:02 a.m., I heard knocking. 3 slow taps. I nearly jumped out of the chair. The sound came from the outside of the shack door. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't seen anyone approach. "Who's there?" I asked, already standing. Another 3 taps. I opened the door just enough to look out. A woman stood there, no coat, no hat, wearing a thin red sweater dusted with snow. Her hair was stiff with ice, strands frozen to her cheeks. Her skin looked gray under the security lights, lips tinged blue. "Can you help me?" she asked. Her voice shook, not from cold, but from exhaustion. "My car broke down." It was the same woman from the car. "Ma'am, you can't be out here dressed like that," I said. "You'll freeze." "I know," she whispered. "I already am." That should have been my warning. But compassion overrides logic faster than anything else. I let her inside. The heat hit her immediately, and she sagged against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. I grabbed a blanket from the emergency cabinet and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her hands were ice cold, stiff as wood. "I called for help," I told her. "A deputy's on the way." She nodded, staring at the floor. "What's your name?" I asked. "Linda." she said after a pause. I was driving to my sister's Christmas Eve dinner. I slid off the road. My phone died. I walked for hours. Hours. In that cold. In those clothes. I swallowed hard. You're lucky you found this place. She looked up at me then, and something in her expression made my chest tighten. I don't feel lucky, she said. She started shivering violently. Her teeth chattered so hard I worried they'd crack. I poured her some coffee, but she didn't touch it. She just stared at her hands, flexing her fingers like she wasn't sure they belonged to her anymore. At 3:27 a.m., the lights flickered. Just once. Then again, the heater sputtered, coughed, and went quiet. The shack fell cold almost instantly. That happens sometimes, I said, though it never had before. Backup generator should kick in. It didn't. The silence pressed in, broken only by the wind howling outside. Linda stood up slowly. It's cold, she said. I know. Just sit tight. She didn't sit. She walked to the window and stared out at the snow-covered road. Her reflection in the glass looked wrong. Slightly delayed. Like it wasn't keeping up with her movements. You said help was coming, she said. Yes. When? Soon. She turned toward me, eyes dark. They won't make it in time. A sudden awful certainty washed over me. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Linda, I said carefully, how long were you outside before you knocked? She smiled then, a thin, empty stretch of lips. Long enough. The temperature in the shack dropped fast. I could see my breath. Frost began creeping across the inside of the windows, spreading in delicate, crawling patterns. What's happening? I whispered. Linda stepped closer. Snow fell from her hair onto the floor, but it didn't melt. I didn't mean to die, she said softly. I really didn't. My heart slammed against my ribs. What did you say? Her eyes met mine, and for the first time they reflected nothing. No light, no warmth. I knocked on doors, she continued. Cars passed me. Houses were dark. I just wanted someone to stop. She reached out, fingers brushing my sleeve. Where she touched, the fabric stiffened, rhymed with frost. I didn't want to be alone, she said. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. You're not real. Her face cracked then, grief pouring through. I am. I just don't belong here anymore. The knocking came again, 3 slow taps, from inside the shack. Behind me. I spun around. The door was closed. The knocking came again, louder this time. Wood groaned under the impact. Linda stepped back, fear flickering across her face. He followed me. Who? Her voice dropped to a whisper. The cold. The door burst inward, slamming against the wall. A wave of air swept through the shack, so cold it burned. Frost exploded across every surface in seconds. Something moved in the doorway. Not a person, not fully. A shape made of wind and ice and shadow, pressing itself into the room. Linda screamed. It reached for her. She cried out my name, though I swear I never told her what it was, and the sound cut off abruptly as she was pulled backward, her body stiffening, skin frosting over like glass. Then she was gone. The door slammed shut. The heater roared back to life. The lights returned. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing, my hands numb, my chest aching like it might split open. Minutes later, headlights flooded the shack. The sheriff arrived, confused, irritated, half-frozen himself. I tried to explain. I couldn't. The words tangled and broke apart. They found the car. They found Linda's body the next morning, 3 miles down the road, frozen solid beside a mailbox, her hand raised like she'd been reaching for something. The official report said hypothermia. Exposure. Tragic, but not uncommon. No mention of the guard shack. No record of her ever being inside. Every Christmas Eve since, I feel the temperature drop around 3 a.m. I hear knocking where it shouldn't be. I don't work nights anymore. I don't answer doors during storms, because sometimes what's knocking isn't asking to come in, it's asking you to join it. Story the end. Christmas Eve of 1998 is the night that split my life into before and after. I was 26, a volunteer firefighter in a small town outside of Des Moines, Iowa, and I believed in ordinary dangers, house fires, car wrecks, bad weather. I believed that if you followed the rules, locked your doors, and stayed alert, you could usually make it home alive. That Christmas taught me how wrong that belief was. The call came in just after 11:40 p.m., when most families were already asleep or pretending to be. Dispatch said there had been a disturbance at a farmhouse on County Road F42. The caller was a neighbor who reported screaming, then silence. No one was answering the phone at the house anymore. Sheriff's deputies were tied up with a rollover accident on the interstate, so they asked us to do a welfare check since we were already out responding to a chimney fire. The address belonged to the Harlan family. Everyone in town knew them. Norman Harlan worked at the grain elevator. His wife, Susan, was a substitute teacher. They had 2 kids, Tyler and Emily, both under 10. They were the kind of family that sent Christmas cards with handwritten notes and baked cookies for the firehouse every December. The drive out there took 15 minutes through open farmland covered in snow that reflected the moonlight like bone. The farmhouse sat far back from the road, its porch light off. The only illumination came from a single Christmas decoration in the front yard. A plastic Santa tipped slightly to one side, glowing red and green from within. My partner that night was Mike Keller, a man who laughed easily and never seemed rattled. As we pulled up, he frowned. "Doesn't look right," he said. The front door was open. Not wide open, just enough to let cold air breathe into the house. No footprints led away from it, only in. The snow was otherwise untouched. We called out, announcing ourselves. No answer. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Not smoke, not gas. Something sour and metallic that made the back of my throat tighten. The living room was lit only by the tree, white lights blinking slowly, reflecting off ornaments and wrapped presents. One of the ornaments lay shattered on the floor, its silver shards scattered like teeth. "Hello?" I called again. We moved room to room. The kitchen was a mess. Chairs knocked over, a plate broken near the sink, Christmas cookies crushed into the linoleum as if someone had stepped on them in a hurry. The oven was still warm. Mike pointed to the hallway. "Basement door's open." That was when we heard it. A low, rhythmic sound coming from below. Not quite a voice. Not quite breathing. Wet. Strained. We descended the stairs slowly, our flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed beams, a single bulb hanging from a chain. That bulb was on. Under it lay Norman Harlan. He was on his back, eyes wide and glassy, mouth frozen open like he'd tried to scream and failed. His chest was torn open, ribs bent outward. Whatever had done it hadn't been precise. It looked like something had reached inside him and pulled. Mike swore softly. I radioed dispatch, my voice shaking as I reported a fatality and requested immediate law enforcement and medical support. As I did, my flashlight swept across the room and landed on the wall. There were words carved into the concrete, deep, uneven gouges like they'd been scratched with a nail or a bone. Not enough, I felt cold spread through my stomach. We backed up the stairs, not turning our backs on the basement until we reached the top. That was when we heard something upstairs. Footsteps. Small ones. "Tyler?" I called. "Emily?" A child's giggle drifted down the hall. Relief hit me so fast it made my knees weak. "They're alive," I whispered to Mike. We followed the sound into Emily's bedroom. Her door was open. The room was dark except for a nightlight shaped like an angel. No one was there. The giggle came again, this time from behind us. Mike spun around, flashlight raised. Susan Harlan stood in the doorway. At least it looked like her. Her hair was matted and streaked with something dark. Her nightgown hung off her shoulders, torn. Her eyes were fixed on us, unblinking. She smiled, and her teeth were stained red. "Santa came," she said. Mike took a step forward. "Susan, you're hurt. We're here to help." She tilted her head slowly. He was hungry. Something moved behind her. 2 shapes crouched low in the hallway. Tyler and Emily, or what was left of them. Their bodies twisted at angles no living child's should. Their faces were slack, mouths stretched into identical smiles. Their eyes reflected our flashlight beams like animals. They scuttled forward on all fours. Mike raised his axe instinctively. "Nope," he said. "No, no, no." Susan lunged. She was fast, too fast. She slammed into Mike, knocking him sideways into the wall. He hit hard, his helmet cracking against the plaster. One of the children leapt onto his back, fingers digging into his neck. I grabbed Susan's arm. Her skin was freezing, like she'd been standing outside all night. She twisted toward me, jaws snapping inches from my face. "You're late," she whispered. I shoved her away and dragged Mike toward the front door. The children followed, skittering, their joints popping audibly. One of them laughed again. We burst out into the snow and slammed the door behind us. Something hit it from the inside hard enough to rattle the frame. Mike collapsed on the porch, gasping. Blood ran down his neck where the child had bitten him. I screamed into my radio for help. The pounding stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then the front door creaked open slowly. Susan stepped out onto the porch. The children stayed just inside, their faces peering through the crack. Snow fell gently around them. Susan looked up at the sky. "He'll be back next year," she said calmly. "He always comes back." She took one step forward and then stopped. Her expression changed. Confusion. Fear. Something behind her growled. Not from inside the house, from the yard. The plastic Santa flickered. Its light dimmed, then flared bright red. The air felt heavy, like the pressure before a storm. I smelled that sour metallic scent again, stronger now. Susan turned slowly. I didn't see what came out of the darkness beyond the porch light. My mind refuses to give it shape even now. I only remember size and movement and the sound it made. A wet, tearing noise, like meat pulled apart by bare hands. Susan screamed once. Then she was gone. The children shrieked and scattered back into the house. The front door slammed shut. We didn't wait. I half-carried Mike to the truck and drove like hell until we hit the main road, not stopping until we saw flashing lights ahead. The official story said Susan Harlan suffered a psychotic break and killed her family before fleeing into the night. Her body was never found. Neither were the children's. The basement wall was repaired. The house was demolished the following spring. Mike survived, but he never returned to the firehouse. He drinks now. He won't talk about that night. I stayed. Every Christmas Eve since then, something happens. Livestock torn apart, doors found open, strange marks in the snow leading nowhere. People whisper about seeing a tall shape near their homes, just outside the reach of the lights. Last year, my neighbor found deep scratches on his front door. Not enough, they said. This Christmas, my porch light flickered for the first time, and I swear, standing just beyond it, I saw something watching me, waiting, deciding whether I'd been good enough. Story the end. I grew up thinking Christmas was supposed to be loud and safe. My mother played old records. My father burned the turkey every year, and no matter how cold it got outside, the house felt warm. That belief didn't survive the winter of 2009 when I was 28 and working as a home health aide in rural Pennsylvania. The job paid poorly, but it kept me busy, and during the holidays, most people were grateful to have someone check in on elderly relatives. That December, I was assigned to a man named Harold Kincaid, who lived alone in a farmhouse several miles outside town. His file said he was 79, widowed, no children, limited mobility, mild dementia. The notes also mentioned he had a habit of calling the office late at night, confused, claiming someone was moving around the house. The dispatcher laughed it off. Old houses settle. Old men imagine things. My first visit was December 20th. French snow lined the long dirt driveway, packed hard from weeks of freezing and thawing. Harold's house looked like it had been abandoned for years. Paint peeling, porch sagging, windows cloudy with age. Only one light glowed inside. When he opened the door, he stared at me for a long time before speaking. "You came back," he said. "I'm your aide," I replied, forcing a smile. "We spoke on the phone yesterday." He frowned. "No. I told them not to send anyone after dark." It was barely noon. Inside, the house smelled like old paper and something sour underneath, like damp wood that never fully dried. The heat was on, but weak. Christmas decorations sat half-finished on a small table. A plastic tree with no lights plugged in, a box of ornaments still sealed. Harold moved slowly, shuffling from room to room as I checked his vitals and prepared a simple meal. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the hallway leading deeper into the house. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I stopped, listening. The house creaked, wind brushing against the siding. Nothing unusual. "Hear what?" He lowered his voice. "It walks when it thinks I'm asleep." I told myself this was textbook dementia, sundowning. Fear mixed with memory. Before I left, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't come on Christmas Eve," he said. "That's when it comes closest." I reported the comment to the office. They told me to continue my visits and note any changes. The next few days were uneventful, though Harold seemed more agitated. He barely slept. Dark circles hung under his eyes. He asked me repeatedly if I had checked the locks, even the interior ones. On December 23rd, I arrived to find muddy footprints in the kitchen. Large ones. Bare feet. "Did you have a visitor?" I asked. He shook his head violently. "I didn't let it in. It just comes when it's cold enough." I wanted to believe an animal had gotten inside, a raccoon. a neighbor. But the prints ended abruptly in the middle of the floor as if whoever made them had simply stopped existing. That night after my shift, the office called. Harold had phoned again, hysterical, claiming someone was standing in his bedroom doorway, breathing. No one was available to drive out until morning. Roads were icy. I was the closest employee. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go. It was Christmas Eve, just after 10 p.m., when I pulled into his driveway. The house was dark except for a faint glow in the back. Snow had started again, thick and heavy, muting sound. I knocked. No answer. The front door was unlocked. "Harold?" I called out, stepping inside. The air was colder than before, my breath visible. The smell was stronger now, metallic, almost sweet. I followed the dim light toward the back bedroom. That's when I heard it, a slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled across wood. Not rushed. Not hiding. I should have left. I know that now. But I was thinking about my job, about responsibility, about not wanting to be the person who abandoned an old man on Christmas Eve. The bedroom door was open. Harold sat upright in bed, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. His skin was pale, almost gray. "Harold," I whispered, moving closer. His gaze shifted past me toward the corner of the room. "Don't turn around," he croaked. "If it knows you see it, it won't leave." Something exhaled behind me. The sound was wet and slow, like lungs filling with fluid. I froze, every instinct screaming. The temperature dropped sharply. My fingers went numb. The room felt wrong, stretched, as if the walls were farther apart than they should be. "I tried to keep it out," Harold said, tears sliding down his temples. "But my wife opened the door. She thought it was a car accident. Christmas night, 1986. I felt pressure behind my eyes, a buzzing in my ears. "It wore his face," Harold whispered. "That's how it gets in." The thing behind me shifted. I saw its shadow stretch along the wall, elongated and uneven, like joints bending the wrong way. "I didn't believe her when she said it came back every winter," he said. "I thought grief made her crazy. Then she disappeared. Locked room. Windows sealed. They said she wandered off." The bed creaked as he trembled. "It doesn't wander," he said. "It waits." The breathing grew louder. I couldn't help it. I turned. It stood inches from me. It was shaped like a man, but wrong in every detail. Its skin looked stretched too tightly over its frame, pale and translucent, veins visible beneath. Its face was almost familiar, like a memory of someone I might have known, but the features didn't settle into place. Eyes that didn't blink, a mouth that opened too wide. Its chest rose and fell, but not in time with the sound it made. It smiled. Harold screamed then, a thin, broken sound. The thing reacted instantly, lunging past me toward the bed. I ran. I don't remember reaching the front door. I don't remember the cold biting into my lungs as I burst outside. I remember slipping on ice, falling hard, hearing a sound from inside the house that no human throat could make. I drove straight to the police station. They went back with me an hour later. The house was silent. Warm again. Too warm. They found Harold in his bed, eyes closed, expression calm. Cause of death was listed as heart failure. There were no signs of a struggle. They asked me about the footprints, about the cold, about what I thought I saw. I told them I must have imagined it. Shock. Stress. They nodded, relieved. I quit my job 2 days later and moved to the city. I avoided rural areas, old houses, quiet nights. Years passed. I got married. I had a daughter. I convinced myself it was over. Until last Christmas. We were staying with my in-laws, snowed in after a storm. The house was full of laughter, music, warmth. My daughter fell asleep on the couch, clutching a new stuffed animal. Around midnight, I went to check on her. The hallway was dark, cold. Her bedroom door was open. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the corner. "Mommy," she whispered, "there's a man breathing." I followed her gaze. The air shimmered like heat over asphalt, but cold. The faintest outline stood there, half-formed, waiting. I slammed the door shut and didn't open it again until morning. My daughter doesn't remember that night. She says it was just a bad dream. But every Christmas Eve since, I hear slow breathing outside my bedroom door, waiting for someone to open it. Story the end. I never believed in evil the way my grandmother did. She used to say some things weren't monsters or ghosts, just people who'd crossed a line and learned how to live on the other side of it. Every Christmas, she warned us not to open the door for strangers, no matter how cold it was, no matter what they said. She died when I was 16, and by the time I was 35, Those warnings felt like folklore meant to scare children into obedience. That Christmas, I was driving from Denver back to my hometown of Red Hollow, Colorado, population just under 2,000, surrounded by forest and ranch land. I hadn't been back in nearly 8 years. My father had died in November, and my mother insisted we still have Christmas in the old house, like nothing had changed. I told myself it would be one night, one dinner, one sleep, then I'd go back to my life. The drive started fine. Snow fell lightly, the kind that makes everything look clean and forgiving. I left before sunrise, hoping to get there before dark. By noon, the snow thickened. By 2, the sky was the color of dirty wool. Radio stations faded in and out, switching from carols to static. Cell service dropped completely once I passed the county line. About 10 miles outside Red Hollow, traffic stopped. A line of cars idled on the highway, hazard lights blinking through the snowfall. I rolled my window down and asked the guy in the pickup ahead of me what was going on. "Accident," he shouted back. "Semi-jackknife near mile marker 88. Sheriff says it'll be hours." I checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Enough to idle, but not all night. Snow continued to pile up, the road disappearing under white. People got out of their cars, stamping their feet, breath fogging the air. Some joked, some cursed. One woman cried quietly on the shoulder. Then, without warning, the engines ahead shut off one by one. A strange silence settled, broken only by wind and the hiss of falling snow. I turned my engine off too, trying to save gas. That's when I noticed the man walking down the line of cars. He wasn't dressed for the weather. No heavy coat, no hat. Just an old red jacket that looked like it had once been part of a Santa suit. The white trim yellowed and matted. His pants were dark and soaked at the cuffs. He carried a burlap sack slung over one shoulder. He knocked on windows, smiling, gesturing. Most people shook their heads. A few cracked their windows just enough to talk. I watched him move closer, an uneasy feeling settling in my gut. Something about the way he walked bothered me. Too stiff, like his joints didn't bend quite right. When he reached my car, he leaned down and knocked gently on the glass. "Evenin'," he said, voice low and gravelly. "Cold night for a breakdown." I didn't open the window. "Sheriff's on the way." He smiled wider. His teeth were small and very even. "That's good, but it'll be a while. Folks are getting cold. Thought I'd offer a little help." "What kind of help?" I asked. He lifted the sack slightly. It shifted, heavy, like it held something solid. Blankets, food, Christmas kindness. Behind him, a woman near the back of the line waved him over. He nodded at me and moved on. I watched him go, my stomach tightening. He didn't leave footprints, or rather, the snow beneath his boots didn't compress the way it should have. 10 minutes later, screaming erupted from the back of the line. People shouted. Doors slammed. Someone ran past my car, face pale, eyes wild, yelling for help. I got out despite every instinct telling me not to. Through the blowing snow, I saw the woman who'd waved the man over. She lay on the ground beside her car, blood dark against the white. Her driver's side door hung open. The man in the red jacket stood over her, sack on the ground at his feet. Someone yelled, "Hey!" The man looked up slowly. His smile was gone. His face seemed longer somehow, stretched, his eyes too dark. Then he grabbed the sack, swung it over his shoulder, and walked off the road into the trees like nothing had happened. We tried to help the woman. She was alive, barely, but her legs, there were marks, deep grooves, like something had been dragged across her skin and pulled. She kept whispering, "He took them. He took them." The sheriff finally arrived an hour later, along with an ambulance. They took statements, told us the woman had gone into shock, that she'd survive. When asked about the man, the sheriff frowned. "No one matching that description lives around here," he said. "Probably a drifter." They cleared the accident by evening. I drove the rest of the way to Red Hollow in silence, hands clenched on the wheel. My mother's house looked smaller than I remembered. Christmas lights glowed weakly along the porch. She hugged me tight, too tight, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. That night, after dinner, the power went out. Wind rattled the windows. Snow piled up fast. We lit candles and sat in the living room, shadows dancing on the walls. That's when my mother brought up Mrs. Caldwell. "They found her car abandoned this morning," she said softly, "just outside town. Blood inside. No body." My throat went dry. "Did the sheriff say anything else?" She shook her head. "But people are scared. 3 pets went missing this week, And old Mr. Hanley down by the creek, they say he vanished. A knock came at the door. We froze. Another knock. Slow. Polite. My mother whispered, "Don't move." The knock came again, heavier. "Please," a voice called. "My car broke down. It's freezing." I recognized the voice immediately. My mother's face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "It's him." "You know who it is?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Your grandmother warned us. Every few years, when winter's bad and people are desperate, he comes. He wears kindness like a costume, takes what he needs." "What does he need?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes shining with fear. "Company. Warmth. Parts." The doorknob rattled. "Let me in," the man said, his voice sliding into something deeper. "It's Christmas." Something heavy thumped against the door, then scratching. Long. Deliberate. We backed away as the doorframe creaked. Then the scratching stopped. Silence. Minutes passed. An hour. We didn't sleep. At dawn, the storm eased. Snow lay pristine outside, except for a single trail leading from the porch into the woods. Deep grooves ran alongside it as if something heavy had been dragged. That afternoon, the sheriff came by. He told us 3 more people were missing, all last seen offering help to a stranger. They never found them. Every Christmas since, Red Hollow empties early. Doors stay locked, lights stay on all night, and no one answers a knock after dark no matter what voice calls from the cold. Because some things don't want your kindness. They want to come inside and stay. Story, the end. I never liked Christmas after the winter of 1998, but for a long time I couldn't explain why without sounding insane. I was 16 then, living in a small town outside of Duluth, Minnesota, the kind of place where everyone knows your truck, your dog, and your business. Winters there weren't just cold, they were predatory. They crept into your bones and stayed. My dad worked nights as a snowplow driver for the county, which meant Christmas Eve usually passed without him. Mom tried to keep things cheerful anyway. She decorated the house in blinking lights and fake pine garlands, played old Bing Crosby records, baked cookies we barely touched. That year, she insisted we go to midnight mass, even though the roads were already bad. "Your father would want us to," she said, pulling on her boots. I remember looking out the window at the snow blowing sideways under the streetlight. Something about it made my stomach knot. The church was 10 miles away, down a stretch of county road that cut through woods and frozen marshland. We were 5 minutes into the drive when the radio crackled and died. Mom frowned and tapped it. "That storm's knocking everything out," she muttered. The headlights carved narrow tunnels through the snow. Trees crowded close to the road, black and bare, like they were leaning in to watch us pass. I tried to distract myself by counting houses, but there were none. Just forest. That was when we saw the car. It sat crooked in the ditch, half buried in snow. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, orange against the white. Mom slowed. Someone slid off. "We should keep going," I said immediately. "Dad always says not to stop in storms." She hesitated, chewing her lip. Then she sighed. "We can't leave them." She pulled over, turned on our hazards, and grabbed her coat. "Stay in the car," she told me, but when she stepped out, the wind nearly knocked her over. I watched through the windshield as she trudged toward the ditch, waving and calling out. The snow swallowed her voice. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. I unbuckled and opened my door. Cold slammed into me like a wall. "Mom," I shouted. She stood by the driver's door of the stranded car, staring inside. Her posture was wrong, rigid, frozen. I ran to her. "Mom, what?" The car was empty. No driver, no passenger, no footprints leading away, just an open door, snow drifting onto the seat. Mom whispered, "That's not possible." I saw it then. The inside of the car was warm. The windshield wasn't iced. The engine ticked softly, like it had just been shut off. "Maybe they went for help," I said, though my voice shook. Mom shook her head. "In this storm? Without a coat?" She looked down. Footprints had appeared in the snow beside us, but not leading away from the car. Leading toward us. They were bare footprints, human but wrong, long toes, pressed deep into the snow as if whoever made them was heavy. They came from the woods, stopped beside the car, and went no farther. I grabbed Mom's arm. "Let's go. Please." She didn't argue. We hurried back to our car, hearts pounding. As soon as the doors shut, Mom locked them. She put the car in gear, and it wouldn't move. The wheels spun uselessly. "No, no, no," she whispered, pumping the gas. I stared out into the woods. Snow swirled between the trees, thick enough to hide anything. Still, I had the overwhelming sense of being watched. Then I saw movement. A shape slipped between two trees, tall, thin, pale. It moved wrong, like its joints bent backward for a moment before straightening again. I screamed, "Mom, drive!" The tires caught suddenly, jerking us forward. The car lurched back onto the road, and Mom floored it. I didn't look back. We skipped church and went straight home. Mom tried calling Dad, but the phone lines were dead. We sat in silence, the house creaking as wind battered it. At 2:17 a.m., the power went out. The lights snapped off so suddenly it felt like the darkness punched us. The furnace died. The house began to cool immediately. Mom lit candles and told me to stay in the living room. She went to check the doors and windows, locking each one carefully. When she reached the back door, she froze. "What is it?" I asked. She pointed. There were handprints on the glass, not frosted handprints like someone breathing on the window, wet ones. Long fingers splayed wide, streaked downward as if whoever pressed them there had slid slowly. Mom wiped them away with her sleeve, hands shaking. "Probably kids," she said weakly. "Just kids." But we both knew better. The knocking started at 3 a.m., soft, polite. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. Mom whispered, "Don't answer." I nodded, barely breathing. The knocking moved to the side of the house, then the front door, then upstairs against my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. Something scratched lightly at the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. A voice drifted through the storm, muffled but clear. "Help me." It sounded like my father. Mom shot to her feet. "Oh my God." I grabbed her. "No, Dad's on shift. He wouldn't be here." The voice came again. "It's cold. Please open the door." Mom sobbed, torn apart by instinct and fear. The voice changed. It slipped, deepened, words stretching unnaturally. "Please." The knocking became pounding. Something slammed against the front door hard enough to rattle the frame. Snow sifted down from the ceiling. Mom dragged me into the basement, shutting the door behind us. The basement was unfinished, concrete walls sweating cold. We huddled behind the washing machine, clutching each other. Above us, the house groaned. Footsteps paced the floor, slow, heavy. Something sniffed loudly, drawing air in with a wet sound. Then came laughter. High, broken, wrong. It dragged on for minutes, echoing through the vents. Finally, silence. We stayed there until morning. When daylight came, the storm had passed. Snow lay smooth and untouched around the house, except for the yard. Bare footprints circled the house again and again, stopping at every door, every window. They never overlapped, never wandered. They were deliberate. The sheriff dismissed it. "Probably a prank," he said, though his eyes lingered on the prints longer than he admitted. Dad came home pale and shaken. He said he'd seen a car in the ditch that night. Same road, same spot, empty. The church canceled services the following Sunday. The pastor never explained why. 2 weeks later, a woman from the next town over was found frozen in her car, door open, engine still warm. Her footprints led into the woods and vanished. After that, people stopped stopping for stranded cars in winter. Years passed. I moved away, tried to forget, but every Christmas Eve, no matter where I am, I wake around 3 a.m., and I hear it. Soft knocking, patient, waiting for me to make the mistake my mother almost did. Story the end. I never believed the stories people told about Christmas being the most dangerous time of year. I thought that was something said to scare kids into staying home or to justify why the news always seemed darker in December. It wasn't until the winter of 2006 that I learned how wrong I was and how thin the line is between a normal holiday and something that never leaves you. That year, Christmas Eve fell on a Sunday. I was 28, newly divorced, and driving from Chicago to a small town in southern Indiana to spend the holiday with my older sister, Megan, and her family. The drive usually took 4 hours. I left after work, figuring I'd get there just before midnight and crash on the couch. The weather had been clear all day, but somewhere past Champaign, the sky changed. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, and the temperature dropped fast. Snow started as light flurries, then thickened until the road looked like it was disappearing beneath my headlights. Traffic thinned out. The radio crackled with warnings about black ice and accidents along the interstate. I considered pulling off at a rest stop, but I was tired and just wanted to get there. I slowed down, gripped the steering wheel tighter, and kept going. About 20 miles from Megan's town, I passed an exit that led to a rural highway. The interstate was backed up ahead, brake lights glowing red through the snow. A sign flashed that the road was closed due to an accident. I had no choice but to take the exit. The highway was narrower, darker, and completely unplowed. Tall trees lined both sides, their branches bending under the weight of the snow. My GPS lost signal almost immediately. I told myself it was fine. The road would reconnect with the main highway eventually. That's when I saw the truck. It was pulled over on the shoulder, hazards blinking, an old white pickup, rust along the wheel wells. A man stood beside it, waving both arms. I slowed down instinctively, then hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. There were no houses around, no other cars, just him, alone, in the snow. I passed him. In my rearview mirror, I saw his arms drop. He stood still, watching my taillights disappear. I felt a stab of guilt, but I pushed it away. People warn you not to stop, especially alone, especially at night. 5 minutes later, my car fishtailed. The back end slid out on a patch of ice, and before I could correct, I was off the road, sliding into a shallow ditch. The impact wasn't hard, but it was enough to wedge the tires deep into the snow. I tried to reverse, then drive forward. The engine whined uselessly. I sat there, heart pounding, breath fogging up the windshield. That's when headlights appeared behind me. The white pickup pulled up slowly and stopped. The man got out. He was taller than I'd thought, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a knit cap pulled low over his face. He walked up to my window and tapped on the glass with his knuckle. I cracked it open an inch. "Looks like you need some help," he said. His voice was calm, friendly even, Midwestern. Nothing threatening about it on the surface. "I'm stuck," I said. "I already called roadside assistance." That was a lie. My phone had no signal, but I didn't want him to know that. He nodded. "Yeah, this road's bad. I got a chain and a tow strap. Can pull you out easy." I hesitated. Snow fell between us in thick, silent flakes. "Okay," I said finally. "Thank you." He smiled. His teeth were very white. We worked in silence. He moved confidently, efficiently, like this was something he'd done many times before. As he attached the strap to my car, I noticed something odd. The bed of his truck was covered with a tarp, weighed down by something bulky underneath. "What happened to your truck?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Battery issues," he said without looking at me. "Cold does that." He climbed back into his truck, and moments later I felt the jolt as my car lurched free. I pulled onto the road, relief washing over me. I got out to thank him. "That was really kind of you," I said. "I really appreciate it." "No problem," he said. "Road's dangerous tonight. You headed far?" "Just into town," I said, gesturing vaguely. He nodded. "Me too. Mind if I follow you for a bit? Just to make sure you don't slide again." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten, but refusing felt rude and maybe unsafe. "Sure," I said. I got back into my car and drove. In the mirror, his headlights stayed close. Too close. After a few minutes, I noticed he wasn't turning off when the road branched. He stayed with me through every curve, every intersection. I tried calling Megan. No signal. The road narrowed further, turning into what looked like a county road. My GPS was useless. I didn't recognize anything. Panic started to creep in. Finally, I slowed and pulled over, pretending to check something. He stopped behind me immediately. I stayed in my car this time. "You okay?" he called out. "Yeah," I said. "I think I know the way from here. You don't need to follow me anymore." He didn't move. Snow settled on his hood. "You sure?" he asked. "This road doesn't lead into town." My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It loops back into the woods," he said. "No houses, no traffic." I locked my doors. "I'm sure," I said. "Thanks again." I put the car in gear and pulled away. I drove faster than I should have, ignoring the ice, the darkness, the fear. In the mirror, his headlights followed. The road ended abruptly in a clearing, trees all around, no houses, no lights. I stopped, hands shaking, mind racing. The truck pulled up behind me, blocking the road. He got out slowly and walked toward my car. I screamed and laid on the horn, though I knew no one could hear me. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 even without signal, just needing to do something. He reached my driver's side door and yanked on the handle. It didn't open. "Open the door," he said, his voice still calm. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I shook my head, crying, pressing myself back against the seat. He stepped back and raised something in his hand. A tire iron. He smashed it into the window. The glass shattered inward, spraying my face with tiny cuts. I screamed again, trying to crawl toward the passenger side. He reached in, grabbing my coat, pulling me back. I fought, kicking, scratching, screaming until my throat burned. Somehow I managed to hit the gas. The car lurched forward, dragging him a few feet before he let go. I didn't look back. I drove blindly, tears streaming, hands slick with blood from the glass. The road blurred. I didn't care if I crashed. I just wanted away. By some miracle, I found another road, then another. Eventually, lights appeared in the distance. A gas station, open. I skidded into the parking lot and ran inside, hysterical, bleeding, barely able to speak. The clerk called the police. They searched the area that night and the next day. They found the clearing. They found tire tracks. They found the tow strap. They didn't find the truck. A week later, they arrested a man 2 counties over. He'd been stopped for a broken taillight. In the bed of his truck, under a tarp, police found duct tape, rope, a shovel, and women's clothing. He confessed to 3 attacks. 2 women hadn't survived. Both had been last seen driving alone near Christmas, stranded on rural roads. At trial, he said Christmas was his favorite time. People were distracted, trusting, willing to stop. Every Christmas Eve now, I stay home, I don't drive at night, I don't stop for anyone. When snow starts to fall, my hands still shake. And every year, when I hear someone say Christmas is about kindness and helping strangers, I think about that dark road, the blinking hazard lights, and how close I came to becoming another true story someone else tells in a whisper. Story the end. The call came in just after dusk on December 23rd, 2009, when the sky in western North Carolina turns the color of bruised metal and the cold sinks straight into your bones. I was volunteering with the county search and rescue team that winter, mostly to keep busy after my brother died in a construction accident earlier that year. The holidays were hard, and being useful helped quiet my head. The dispatcher's voice was tight, professional in the way people get when they're trying not to panic. A family from Charlotte had reported their father missing. He'd gone out early that morning to cut a Christmas tree on a piece of land his cousin owned near the Pisgah National Forest. He hadn't come back. His truck was still parked by the service road. By the time our team assembled, the temperature had dropped below freezing. Snow from the night before still clung to the ground in dirty patches. The woods were dense, mostly hardwoods, stripped bare for winter, with underbrush that grabbed at your legs. We split into pairs and started grid searching with headlamps as the light faded. I was paired with a man named Carl, a retired firefighter who'd lived in the county his entire life. He knew those woods better than anyone. As we moved deeper in, he told me this wasn't the first time someone had gone missing around Christmas. People think the woods are peaceful this time of year, he said. Quiet. They forget quiet can hide things. We found the tree first. A Fraser fir, half cut through at the base, lying on its side like it had been dropped in a hurry. A few feet away, there were footprints in the thin snow leading downhill. Then they stopped, just ended, like the man had vanished. Carl crouched, shining his light low. "That ain't right," he muttered. We followed a faint trail, broken branches, disturbed leaves, until the forest thickened and the ground sloped sharply. The smell hit us before we saw anything. Metallic, sour, unmistakable. We found the man at the bottom of a ravine, his body twisted unnaturally against the rocks. His throat was open. This wasn't an accident. The sheriff's department took over. We stood back, hands stuffed into our pockets, breath fogging the air. One of the deputies threw up behind a tree. They said an animal attack at first, but no tracks matched, and the wound was too clean. I went home that night with the smell still stuck in my nose. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the half-cut tree, abandoned, waiting. The next morning, Christmas Eve, another call came in. A woman named Linda Mae Henson hadn't shown up for her shift at a diner just outside town. Her car was found parked behind the building, keys still in the ignition. She lived alone in a trailer a few miles away. When deputies went to check, they found the door standing open and the Christmas lights inside still blinking. Her body was in the bathroom. Same wound. By noon, the town was buzzing with rumors. A mountain lion, a drifter, a cult. Parents pulled their kids out of school early. Churches canceled Christmas Eve services. Snow started falling again, thick and heavy, cutting visibility to nothing. The sheriff held a meeting that afternoon and asked for volunteers to help patrol the roads and keep an eye out. Against my better judgment, I agreed to ride along with Carl again. He didn't look surprised when I showed up. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked as we climbed into his truck. I nodded. The woods felt wrong. Not hostile, exactly. Just watching. We drove the back roads as darkness fell, headlights slicing through the snow. Around 8 p.m., Carl slowed the truck near a pull-off by the Forest Service gate. Someone's there, he said. At first, I didn't see anything. Then a shape moved near the tree line. A person, hunched, wearing a heavy coat. They stepped back into the woods as soon as the headlights touched them. Carl reached for his radio. Static crackled, then nothing. No signal, he said quietly. We got out anyway. The snow muffled our footsteps as we followed the tracks into the trees. They were fresh, deep. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hide. The forest closed in around us, branches scraping our jackets. The temperature dropped sharply, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. We came upon a clearing I didn't remember seeing before. In the center stood a crude structure made of branches and wire. It looked like a lean-to at first glance, but when my light swept over it, I realized it was shaped like a manger. Inside, arranged carefully on pine needles, were bones, human bones. Some old, some newer, all cleaned and placed with deliberate care. At the back of the structure, nailed to a tree, was a wooden cross made from 2 broken branches. Hanging from it was a strip of cloth soaked dark with dried blood. Carl made a sound I'd never heard him make before. Fear, naked and raw. This ain't new, he whispered. This has been here years. A twig snapped behind us. We spun around, lights flashing wildly. The man stepped into view slowly, hands empty, face shadowed by a knit cap. He was tall, gaunt, his beard streaked with gray. He smiled when he saw us, a wide, calm smile. "Merry Christmas," he said. Carl told him to stop where he was, his voice shaking. The man ignored him, taking another step forward. His eyes flicked to the manger behind us. "They forget," he said softly. "Every year. They cut trees, sing songs, pretend it's all clean, but something always has to die." He lunged. Everything happened fast and slow at the same time. Carl fired his gun. The sound cracked through the woods like thunder. The man stumbled, then kept coming. I don't remember grabbing the flare from my belt, but suddenly it was in my hand, burning bright red. I slammed it into his chest. He screamed, a high, terrible sound, and fell back into the snow, rolling, trying to put out the flame. The smell of burning cloth and hair filled the air. He didn't get back up. Backup arrived minutes later, lights flashing through the trees. They found us shaking, standing over the body. The man's name was never released publicly. They said he'd been living off the grid for decades, drifting between counties, obsessed with sacrifice and purification. He believed Christmas required blood. They found more sites like the manger, more bones. The official story was that he acted alone. The town tried to move on. The diner reopened. Christmas lights went back up the following year. I moved away that spring. I thought I'd left it behind. 10 years later, I was living in Indiana, working as a building inspector. Christmas had become something I tolerated rather than celebrated. On December 24th, 2019, I was finishing paperwork late at the office when I heard a noise from the basement level of the municipal building. Thumping, slow, rhythmic. The basement was mostly storage, old records, maintenance rooms. I went down with my flashlight, irritation outweighing caution. Halfway down the stairs, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A small manger, built from broken chair legs and twine, sat at the bottom of the steps. Inside were bones, fresh. The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard breathing behind me and a familiar voice, calm and reverent, whispering, "They forget." I don't remember much after that. I woke up in the hospital on Christmas morning, my throat bandaged, my body aching. They said a transient had attacked me and fled when a security guard came down to check the breaker. They never found him. Every year since, around Christmas, bones turn up in places they shouldn't be. Sometimes in the woods, sometimes in buildings, always arranged the same way. People say it's coincidence, copycats, urban legend, I know better. Some traditions don't end. They just wait for people to forget again. Story, the end. Snow had been falling since before dawn, the kind of steady, muffled snowfall that makes a small town feel far more isolated than it really is. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the drifts along the roads outside Maple Hollow had swallowed mailbox posts and crept halfway up first-floor windows. People stayed inside, lights glowing dimly behind curtains, families cooking, gathering, settling in. It should have felt safe, peaceful. But for me, Christmas had never carried that warm feeling. And that year, 2014, in a small rental house on the far edge of town, I learned that peace is sometimes the last thing snowfall brings. I had moved to Maple Hollow only a few months earlier, after a rough breakup and an even rougher fallout with my parents. The house was cheap, old, and drafty, but it was quiet. At 24, I liked the idea of starting over somewhere nobody knew me. I liked the silence. At least I thought I did. The first strange thing happened 4 nights before Christmas. I had come home late from my shift at the hardware store and found the front door slightly open. Not wide, just an inch. Enough to see the deadbolt was no longer set. I remember standing on the porch, snowflakes melting on my jacket, staring at that sliver of darkness inside. I lived alone. I always locked the door, every time. When I stepped in, lights off, the place felt colder than it should have. The heater hummed, but the air had a sharpness to it, as if the house had been open to the night for hours. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. But the smell, something like cold metal, lingered in the hall. I told myself I had been tired that morning and forgot to lock up. I convinced myself of that lie for exactly one day. The next night, around 3:30 a.m., I heard footsteps above me. The attic wasn't finished, just insulation beams and old boxes left by the landlord. No reason for anyone to be up there. I lay in bed, heart pounding, listening to those slow, dragging steps, one at a time. Heel first, then a faint shuffle. The rhythm was wrong, not steady, not natural. Each step sounded hesitant, like whoever or whatever was up there was walking for the first time. I didn't get out of bed. Not that night. When the steps finally stopped, I lay awake until dawn, gripping my phone, ready to dial 911. I checked the attic the next morning, flashlight in one shaking hand, the other gripping a metal broom handle like a weapon. Nothing. Just cold air and slanted light through a small window. No footprints in the insulation. No signs of animals. Just stillness. I started sleeping with the TV on after that. 2 days before Christmas, the footsteps returned, this time earlier, around midnight. I muted the TV, listening. The steps moved from one end of the attic to the other. Not fast. Slow. Testing. Then a long scraping sound, something heavy being dragged. I didn't sleep again until morning. That day at work, I asked my coworker Dustin if he knew anything about the house's history. Maple Hollow was the kind of place where everyone knew something about everyone else. He hesitated, then asked me a strange question. "You been hearing stuff? Like scratching? Walking?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged awkwardly. "Nobody's lived in that place longer than a few months. People say the guy who owned it before the landlord disappeared. Left everything inside. They found the front door open, like he walked out or something made him." He said it like a joke, but his expression didn't match, and I didn't laugh. By Christmas Eve, I was exhausted. I planned to make a small dinner, watch a movie, chess, and sleep through the holiday. I didn't have family visiting, I didn't have anywhere else to be, but the weather had shut the town down. Even the hardware store closed early. The snowstorm had become a blizzard. That night I microwaved leftovers and sat on the couch with a blanket, the wind howling outside. It felt like the whole world had gone still, except for me. At 11:47 p.m., the power went out. I sat frozen in sudden darkness, the only light a faint orange glow from the street lamp buried in snow. The house made a soft creaking sound as the heater shut down. Then the footsteps began again. But this time, they were louder, closer. I wasn't imagining them. They weren't faint or muffled. They were deliberate, heavy, pressed into the ceiling as if each one carried weight. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and backed toward the kitchen, heart hammering. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? Someone's in my attic again? The roads were blocked. Police wouldn't reach me until morning. A sudden crack sounded above me, wood splintering. Dust rained down. I stumbled, hitting the counter. Another crack. I pointed the flashlight upward just as a section of the attic floor bowed downward, groaning under pressure. Something was up there. Something big. I ran to the front door, yanked it open. Snow blasted in, wind whipping. I stepped outside in just socks, freezing almost instantly. But I didn't care. I ran into the yard, slipping, sinking into drifts, panting clouds of white breath. I turned back toward the house just in time to see a shadow pass in front of the small attic window. It wasn't human-shaped. I didn't go back inside. Not then. I trudged across the yard to my neighbor's place, a retired couple who rarely left their house. I banged on their door until the porch light flicked on. They let me in, confused and concerned, and sat me down with blankets and tea. I didn't tell them the full story. I said I heard someone in the attic. They offered me their spare room, but insisted on calling the sheriff first thing in the morning. I barely slept, not because I heard anything, but because I kept imagining what I had seen. That silhouette, too tall, too thin, neck bent like it didn't know how to hold its own head. Morning came gray and windless. The sheriff drove me home, his SUV plowing through packed snow. "Stay behind me," he said as we approached the house. Inside, everything looked untouched. No broken ceiling, no splintered wood, no dust on the floor. He climbed into the attic while I waited below, heart pounding. After a few minutes, he came back down, eyebrows drawn together. "Nothing up there," he said. "No tracks, no animals, no damage. You sure you weren't half asleep when you ran out?" I didn't argue. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. He left after checking the rest of the house. I stood in the living room, feeling stupid, exhausted, and humiliated. Then I noticed something. The attic hatch, closed when I returned, had a small smear along the edge. Dark. Reddish. Blood. I packed a bag as fast as I could and walked back to my neighbor's house, telling them power still hadn't returned. They offered their guest room again, no questions. I planned to leave town after the storm. I didn't want answers anymore. That night, Christmas night, I slept for the first time in days. Heavy, deep sleep. At 3:11 a.m., something woke me. Not sound. Cold. The room was freezing, far colder than the hallway outside. I could see my breath, and the window, though sealed tight, had frost spreading across the inside of the glass in intricate, branching patterns, almost like handwriting. I sat up slowly. The pattern stopped growing. Then, right in front of me, a new line traced itself into the frost, deliberate, slow, like an invisible finger writing, "Found you." My breath hitched. A soft creak sounded behind me. I turned. In the corner, something stood, too tall to fit the space, its head bent against the ceiling, joints jutting at impossible angles like someone had stretched a person until the limbs warped. It had no face, just smooth, pale skin, like a blank canvas that pulsed faintly, as if something beneath it was trying to push through. Its arms dangled all the way to the floor, fingers long enough to scrape against it. It took one step toward me, slow, heavy, achingly familiar. The footsteps. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The thing leaned forward, its faceless head almost touching mine. The cold around it deepened until I felt my skin burning. Then it spoke, not with a mouth, but from everywhere at once. "You opened the door." My blood turned to ice. "You let me in." I scrambled backward, falling off the bed. The thing moved, not fast, but with dreadful certainty, like it knew I had nowhere to go. Its hand reached toward me, fingers spreading wide. I tried to stand, to run, but the cold was crushing, freezing my joints, tightening around my lungs. The door burst open. Light flooded the room. The neighbor, her husband behind her, both wide-eyed. And just like that, it vanished. Gone in a blink, like it had never been there. The cold, the frost, the shadow in the corner, gone. I was shaking so badly I couldn't speak for almost an hour. I didn't go back to sleep. I didn't stay another night. By noon, I had packed my car, thanked the neighbors, and driven straight out of Maple Hollow without looking back. I didn't go home for Christmas the next year, or the year after. I rented a studio in a crowded city, surrounded by noise and people and life. I thought distance and denial might erase what happened. But on Christmas Eve last year, as I was getting ready for bed, a gust of cold air slid under my apartment door. I checked the hallway. Nothing there. But when I came back inside, frost had crept across the bathroom mirror in delicate branching patterns, and in the center a single line appeared as I watched. "Still here. I don't sleep on Christmas anymore." Story the end. The first Christmas after my brother disappeared, my mother kept setting an extra place at the table. She said it was for tradition. I knew it was denial. In our town, denial is as common as snowdrifts, especially when the woods swallow someone and don't give them back. We lived outside a small community in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the trees lean over the road like they're listening. My brother Aaron was 22, home from college for winter break in 2009. He went out on December 18th to help a neighbor cut firewood and never came back. His truck was found parked at the edge of the forest, keys still in the ignition, radio tuned to a station playing nonstop Christmas music. The police said hypothermia, or maybe he wandered off drunk, even though Aaron didn't drink. After a week, the searches slowed. After 2 weeks, they stopped. By Christmas morning, the snow had erased the footprints, and the town decided to move on. But my mother couldn't. She baked Aaron's favorite cookies and left them on his bed. She wrapped a gift and placed it under the tree with his name on it, written in her careful script. My father didn't protest. He just sat in his chair, staring at the TV, volume low, as if loud sounds might break something fragile in him. That night, after everyone went to bed, I heard a knock at the door. It was soft, almost polite. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I told myself it was the wind. Then it came again, louder this time. When I opened the door, the cold rushed in, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The porch was empty. No footprints. Just a small, neatly wrapped box sitting on the welcome mat. Brown paper. Red twine. I brought it inside and set it on the table. I should have woken my parents. I didn't. Something about it felt personal, like it was meant only for me. Inside the box was a Christmas ornament. It was carved from wood, smooth and pale, shaped like a small angel. The craftsmanship was good, almost professional. On the back, someone had burned a name into the surface. Aaron. I dropped it like it burned my hand. The police took the ornament the next day. They asked questions. They wrote reports. They said it was probably a cruel prank. Teenagers. Sick joke. Nothing to worry about. That was the first lie. On December 26th, the phone rang just after midnight. My mother answered. I could hear her voice change, the way it did when she was trying to stay calm for someone else's sake. When she hung up, she sat down slowly, like her legs had forgotten how to work. They found him, she said. They didn't find Aaron. Not really. They found pieces of him. In a clearing about 5 miles from where his truck was abandoned, searchers discovered a structure made of branches tied together with wire. At first glance, it looked like a crude shelter. When they got closer, they realized it was shaped like a tree. Hanging from it were ornaments, bones, teeth, strips of dried skin twisted into ribbons. Each piece had been cleaned, polished, and hung with care. At the top was Aaron's skull, positioned so the empty eye sockets faced east toward our house. The sheriff called it a ritualistic display during the press conference. He assured everyone there was no danger to the public. He didn't explain how someone could build something like that without leaving footprints, without anyone hearing a thing. They never caught anyone. The town grieved, then healed, the way towns do, by forgetting. New families moved in. The forest reclaimed the clearing. My parents sold the house and moved closer to my aunt. I left for college and tried to bury the memories under textbooks and distance. It worked. For a while. In December of 2014, I was living in Chicago, working late hours, barely thinking about Christmas at all. On December 21st, I came home to find a package leaning against my apartment door. Brown paper. Red twine. My hands shook as I carried it inside. Inside was another ornament. This one was glass, blown thin and clear. Inside the hollow sphere floated something dark. A tooth. On the outside, written in black ink, was a date. 12/25/2009. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe part of me was afraid they'd say it was nothing again. I threw the ornament into the dumpster behind my building and stood there in the snow until my teeth chattered. That night, I dreamed of the forest. In the dream, the trees were decorated, every branch heavy with ornaments that clinked softly in the wind. When I woke up, I could still hear the sound. 2 days later, a woman in a suburb outside Cleveland disappeared while walking her dog on Christmas Eve. Her body was found on December 27th, arranged beneath a dead pine tree in a public park. The local news showed a blurred photo of the scene. I recognized the shape. I called the number listed on the report and told them about my brother, about the ornament, about the tree. They took my statement. They thanked me. They never followed up. Over the next few years, it kept happening. Every Christmas somewhere in the Midwest, someone vanished. A man driving home from a late shift. A teenage girl cutting through the woods behind her house. An elderly couple walking to church. Sometimes they found bodies. Sometimes they found nothing at all. When they did find something, it was always the same. A tree. Sometimes elaborate, sometimes simple. always decorated, always precise, and always somewhere in the display an ornament marked with a date from a previous year. I started collecting newspaper clippings. I made a board in my apartment, stringing red yarn between locations and dates. It formed a rough circle, spiraling outward year by year. Always Christmas. Always within a few hundred miles of where Aaron disappeared. In 2018, I received another package. This time it was heavier. Inside was a small wooden box. Inside that, wrapped in tissue paper, was a finger bone. On the box lid, burned deep into the wood, were 3 words, for the family. I screamed until my neighbors called the police. They searched my apartment, they took the box, they suggested counseling. One officer, a woman with tired eyes, lingered after the others left. My uncle went missing on Christmas when I was a kid, she said quietly. They never found him. I always wondered. She slipped me her card. In 2020, she called me. They found another one, she said. And this time, there's something you need to see. The tree was in a barn miles from the nearest road. It was the largest one yet, towering nearly to the rafters. It was constructed from lumber, wire, and bone. Hundreds of ornaments swayed gently in the cold air. At the base were gifts, wrapped, tagged. One of them had my name on it. I didn't want to open it. I did anyway. Inside was a photograph. It showed my family on Christmas morning, 2008. Aaron was smiling, arm around my shoulders. On the back of the photo, written in familiar, careful script, was a message. Thank you for sharing. I knew then that this wasn't random. It wasn't a drifter or a cult or a copycat. It was something that moved through families, through blood and memory, using Christmas like a door left unlocked. The barn burned down that night. Electrical fire, they said. The evidence was lost. The case went cold. Last Christmas, my mother died in her sleep, peacefully, the doctor said. On December 24th, I stayed alone in my apartment, lights off, phone silenced. At 11:59 p.m., there was a knock at my door. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I didn't open it. In the morning, there was a package waiting, brown paper, red twine. Inside was the last ornament. It was a mirror, small and round, framed in bone. Etched around the edge was a single date, 12/25/2025. I don't know what happens this Christmas. I don't know if the tree is meant for me or because of me. I just know that somewhere in the woods, something is waiting to be decorated. Story the end. On December 23rd, 1996, I was working the late shift at the county sheriff's office in a small town outside of Duluth, Minnesota. Christmas always made the nights quieter. People stayed home, drank too much eggnog, and tried to pretend their families were functional for 48 hours. Calls slowed to nothing after midnight. The snow fell thick and steady, muting everything until the world felt sealed off and hollow. I was a deputy then, 27 years old, fresh off a bad breakup and volunteering for holiday shifts, so I wouldn't have to sit alone in my apartment. Around 1:40 a.m., the phone rang. The dispatcher handed me the slip with a look I still remember. Welfare check, she said. Family hasn't answered calls all day. Name's Harlan. Farmhouse on Old Creek Road. Old Creek Road was miles out of town, past the last streetlight, where the plows went when they felt like it. I recognized the name. The Harlans had 3 kids. The oldest boy was in my niece's class. Good family. Church-going. The kind you didn't expect trouble from. The drive out there took almost 40 minutes because of the snow. My headlights tunneled through the dark, illuminating trees that leaned inward like they were listening. I remember the radio playing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, the singer's voice thin and warped through static. I turned it off halfway through the first verse. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No lights, no smoke from the chimney, no tire tracks in the snow except my own. The house was a 2-story farmhouse, white siding, big front porch. There were Christmas decorations everywhere. Lights on the eaves, an inflatable Santa slumped over in the yard, a wreath on the door. None of it was lit. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder, and announced myself. Still nothing. I tried the door. It was unlocked. The smell hit me immediately. Not rot, not exactly. More like old copper and damp pine. My boots left wet tracks on the hardwood floor as I stepped inside. The house was cold, colder than it should have been. My breath fogged. Sheriff's office, I called out. Anyone home? The Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, fully decorated. Presents were stacked neatly underneath it, wrapped and tagged. A plate of cookies sat on the coffee table, untouched, with a glass of milk that had formed a skin on top. That was the first moment I knew something was wrong. I moved through the house slowly, hand on my holster. The kitchen was spotless, the table set for dinner, 4 plates, 4 glasses, no fifth place setting. I remember thinking it was strange because there were 5 Harlans. I found the mother first. She was in the downstairs bathroom, slumped against the tub. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. There was dried blood on her nightgown and a deep wound across her abdomen, like something had torn into her with bare hands. She'd been dead for hours. I called it in, my voice sounding far away to my own ears. Backup was at least 30 minutes out. Snow had gotten worse. The father was in the barn. I followed a trail of dark stains through the snow, each step making my stomach tighten. The barn door was half open, swaying slightly in the wind. Inside, hanging from a meat hook meant for deer, was what was left of him. His chest had been opened, ribs cracked apart. Something was missing. I didn't let myself think about what. I stumbled back outside and vomited into the snow. I wanted to leave. Protocol said I should secure the scene, search for survivors. My hands shook as I wiped my mouth and forced myself back toward the house. The kids were still inside. The youngest girl was in her bedroom, tucked into bed like she was sleeping. Her throat had been cut so cleanly it barely looked real. There was a candy cane placed carefully on her pillow, stained red at one end. The middle child, a boy, was in the hallway closet. He'd tried to hide. The door was splintered inward, like it had been ripped open. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, neck snapped. Something had carved a smile into his face, deep enough to expose teeth. I didn't want to go upstairs, but I did. The oldest boy's room was empty. That's when I heard the sound, a faint jingling drifting down from the second floor. Bells. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to run. The sound came again, closer now. Slow footsteps on wood. Heavy. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. Something moved at the top of the stairs. A shape, broad and tall, filling the doorway. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of it, to turn it into something normal. It was wearing a Santa suit, not a costume you'd buy in a store. This one looked old, the red fabric dark and stiff, the white trim matted and gray. The beard hung in clumps around a mouth that was wet and red. Bells were sewn into the hem of the coat, chiming softly with every movement. It held something in its hands, the boy's head. I drew my weapon and shouted, the sound tearing out of me. The thing on the stairs tilted its head, studying me with eyes that were too small, too bright. "You're early," it said. Its voice was wrong, too deep, too calm. I fired. The shot echoed through the house, deafening. The bullet hit it in the shoulder, tearing fabric and flesh. Dark blood splattered the wall. It didn't fall. It laughed. The sound was wet and joyful, like it was genuinely amused. It took a step down the stairs, bells ringing cheerfully. "Ho," it said. "Ho." I fired again and again. One shot hit its chest. Another tore through its thigh. It stumbled, grabbed the banister, then righted itself, still smiling. I turned and ran. I bolted out the front door and into the snow, my lungs burning, my boots slipping. I didn't look back. I made it to my cruiser and fumbled with the keys. Hands numb, panic roaring in my ears. That's when something slammed into the side of the car hard enough to rock it. The window shattered inward. Glass sprayed across my face and uniform. A massive hand punched through the opening, grabbing at the air, missing my head by inches. I screamed and hit the gas. The car fishtailed, nearly spinning out, but somehow I stayed on the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the driveway, watching me leave. It raised one hand and waved. The bells rang until I couldn't hear them anymore. They found the oldest boy's body 2 days later, buried in the woods behind the house. He'd been alive when he was taken. That much was clear. The case was never solved. Officially, they blamed a drifter. Animal attacks, satanic panic nonsense. Anything that didn't involve writing down what I told them I saw. My report was edited, details removed. I was encouraged to take medical leave. I quit the force that spring. I tried to move on, got married, had a daughter, moved to a different state. For a long time, it almost worked. Then, the Christmas my daughter turned 7, she came running into our bedroom early on Christmas morning, excited and breathless. "Daddy," she said, "Santa came." My wife laughed sleepily. Of course he did. There was someone else too, my daughter said. He was outside. He was watching. The room felt very cold. I asked her what she meant, forcing my voice to stay steady. She told me she'd woken up in the night because she heard bells. She went to the window and saw Santa in the yard, standing by the tree, and behind him in the shadows was another Santa, taller, not moving. He smiled at me, she said. I didn't like him. I checked the yard. There were footprints in the snow. Big ones. Leading from the tree to the edge of the woods and back again. Every Christmas since then, I stay awake all night with a loaded gun in my hands. Sometimes I hear bells far off in the distance. Sometimes I smell pine and copper. Sometimes in the reflection of the dark window, I see a red shape standing just out of the light. I know what it is. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a killer who snapped. It was something older, something that learned how to wear the idea of Christmas like a skin. Something that comes when families are warm and doors are unlocked and people believe in good things, and it knows where we live. Story the end. The first time I told anyone about it, they laughed and said it sounded like something from a late-night cable documentary. I stopped talking after that. What happened that Christmas wasn't a story meant to entertain. It was something that crawled into my life and never left. I still live in the same state, still smell pine and gasoline and old blood whenever December rolls around, and I still don't put up a tree. In 1996, I was 19 and home from my first semester of community college. My parents lived outside a dying mill town in western Pennsylvania in a sagging farmhouse surrounded by frozen fields. My dad worked maintenance at the paper plant. My mom cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but Christmas was sacred. No matter how bad the year had been, the house smelled like cinnamon and ham, and the radio stayed on all day. That winter was brutally cold. The kind of cold that makes wood crack and engines refuse to turn over. Snow started falling on December 20th and didn't really stop. By Christmas Eve, drifts were stacked higher than the fence line. The power flickered constantly, and the roads were barely passable. On the afternoon of Christmas Eve, my dad went out to cut firewood. He didn't come back. At first, none of us panicked. He'd done this 100 times. But by dark, my mom was pacing, staring out the window every few minutes. My younger brother, Mark, who was 12, kept asking if Dad was okay. The radio crackled with warnings about the storm worsening overnight. Mom finally made me grab my coat. We followed Dad's footprints across the field toward the tree line. The wind howled, pushing snow into our faces. The tracks stopped abruptly near the woods. There was blood on the snow. Not a lot at first, just scattered drops, already turning brown at the edges. My stomach knotted. We followed the trail into the trees, calling his name. The woods were too quiet, like they were holding their breath. We found his hat first, then his gloves, then his boot. He was hanging from a low oak branch by a length of yellow rope. His feet were inches off the ground. His face was swollen and purple, eyes bulging, tongue protruding between his teeth. His jacket was open, shirt torn. His hands were bound behind his back. My mom screamed and ran toward him. I grabbed her, trying to pull her back, but she fought like a wild animal. We were both sobbing, slipping in the snow, when a voice spoke behind us. "You shouldn't touch that." I spun around. A man stood a few yards away, bundled in a sheriff's deputy jacket. He held a flashlight and a notepad. His face was long and pale, his expression flat. "Help us," my mom begged. "Please, it's my husband." The man nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "I found him earlier." I remember thinking that was strange. If he'd found my dad earlier, why was he still here? Why hadn't he come to the house? He told us to go back home, said the roads were too bad for transport, and that the coroner would come in the morning. He promised he'd stay with the body. We didn't want to leave Dad there, swinging in the wind, but the man's voice was firm, authoritative. We believed him because we wanted to believe someone was in control. When we got back to the house, Mark was crying hysterically. The power went out completely just as Mom closed the door. We lit candles and sat in silence, listening to the wind batter the walls. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Mom froze. "Who is it?" she called. "It's the deputy," the man said. "I need to ask a few more questions." I didn't like the way he said it. Too casual, like he was already inside. Mom opened the door a crack. The man stood there alone, snow crusted on his jacket. His flashlight beam swept the entryway. "Can I come in?" he asked. Before Mom could answer, Mark screamed. I turned to see him pointing at the window. Frosted glass, but clear enough to see a dark shape moving just outside. Another knock came, this time at the back door, then another at the side of the house. The man on the porch smiled. "You didn't think I came alone, did you?" He shoved the door open. Everything after that feels like it happened underwater. Sounds were muffled, movements too slow. The man grabbed my mom by the throat and slammed her against the wall. I lunged at him, scratching, biting. He threw me aside like I weighed nothing. The back door burst open. Another man came in, then another. They were dressed in mismatched winter gear, faces hidden behind scarves. One of them was laughing, not nervous laughter, genuine joy. They tied us up with zip ties and duct tape. I could smell gasoline on their clothes. One of them leaned close to my face, his breath hot and sour. "Merry Christmas," he whispered. They dragged Mom into the living room. Mark was crying so hard he was choking. I tried to scream, but the tape held firm. The man in the deputy jacket stood in front of us, hands on his hips, watching like a proud host. "You know why your husband's dead?" he asked conversationally. "Because he saw something he shouldn't have. Same reason you're going to die." They turned on the radio. Christmas music filled the house, tinny and distorted. One of the men poured gasoline on the couch, the curtains, the tree we'd put up that morning. The smell burned my nose. I heard my mom screaming from the other room. Then I heard nothing. They moved Mark next. I won't describe what they did to him. I can't. I just remember his eyes locking on mine, wide with terror, begging me to do something. Anything. Something inside me snapped. When the man in the deputy jacket turned his back, I rolled toward the fireplace. My hands were bound, but I managed to hook the edge of the poker with my fingers and drag it toward me. When he turned back around, I slammed it into his knee with all the strength I had. He went down screaming. Chaos erupted. One of the men ran toward me. I rolled, barely missing a kick to the head. Another grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. I bit him. Hard. I tasted blood. The house was on fire now. Flames climbed the walls, smoke choking the air. The men were shouting, panicking. I don't know how I got free. I only know I ended up outside, barefoot in the snow, lungs burning. The house behind me was an inferno. I could hear them screaming inside. The fire department arrived hours later. The roads had finally been cleared enough. They found 3 bodies inside the house, burned beyond recognition. They said my mom and brother died from smoke inhalation before the fire reached them. They said my dad's death was a suicide. I told them everything. They told me I was in shock. They said there was no record of a deputy assigned to our area matching that description. No fingerprints, no suspects. The case was closed. I moved away as soon as I could. Changed my name, tried to forget. But every Christmas Eve, just after midnight, there are 3 slow knocks on my door. I never answer. Story the end. The year it happened, Christmas came early and stayed too long. That's how it felt afterward, like the holiday never quite ended and the cold just learned how to wear different masks. I was 34 and working as a volunteer firefighter in western Pennsylvania, a small town tucked into hills where everyone knew everyone else's business and pretended not to. What I'm about to tell you is something that went through official reports, coroner statements, and quiet conversations that stopped when strangers walked into the room. People still argue about it, whether it was coincidence or something worse. I was there. I saw what was left. That's why I don't decorate anymore. It started on December 17th, 2006, with a call that should have been routine. Welfare check. Elderly male. No heat. The temperature had dropped to single digits overnight, the kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt. The address was an old farmhouse about 6 miles outside town, owned by a man named Walter Hensley. Everyone knew him, though few knew him well. He was polite, quiet, always mailed handwritten Christmas cards with perfect cursive and no return address. We found him dead in his living room, sitting upright in a recliner like he'd simply fallen asleep watching TV. The fireplace was cold, the furnace was working, no signs of struggle. The odd part was the decorations. His entire house was Christmas, wall to wall. Tinsel draped from door frames, dozens of ceramic Santas on every surface, lights blinking in the windows even though it was daylight. And the tree, God, the tree. It was massive, nearly touching the ceiling, and decorated entirely with photographs instead of ornaments. They were old photos, black and white, sepia, color fading to pink, families, children, couples, some smiling, some not. Every single photo had a date written on the back in red ink. The coroner later said Walter had died of hypothermia, which made no sense given the working heat. The report mentioned paradoxical undressing, but Walter was fully clothed, coat and gloves on, as if he'd dressed to go outside and then changed his mind. We chalked it up to old age and odd habits. Small towns are good at that. On December 19th, a family of 4 didn't show up for school or work. The Morrisons lived in a ranch-style house just off Route 40. When the state police forced the door, they found all 4 of them in the basement, arranged in lawn chairs facing a small artificial Christmas tree. The tree was plugged in, lights glowing. The furnace had been shut off manually. The windows were sealed with plastic. Pinned to the tree were photographs of the family taken from outside their own home. Dates in red ink. The official cause of death was again hypothermia. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints that didn't belong. By the time the 3rd house was found, people were scared. They didn't say it outright, but you could hear it in the way voices dropped, the way people glanced at their thermostats like they might betray them. The 3rd was a single mother, Denise Keller, and her teenage son. Same scene. Christmas decorations everywhere. Heat turned off. Photos on the tree. I started noticing things then. Small things. Every house had received Christmas cards in the days leading up to the deaths. Neighbors remembered seeing them in mailboxes. No one remembered reading them closely. Just season's greetings in neat cursive. I volunteered for patrol that week, riding along with the sheriff at night, checking on houses where lights stayed off too long. On December 22nd, around 2 a.m., we passed Walter Hensley's farmhouse. Even though it had been cleared and locked, the Christmas lights were on. The sheriff slowed the car. We both stared. "They cut the power," he said quietly. We got out. The snow was fresh, untouched except for a single set of footprints leading up to the front door. They were small, precise, like someone walking carefully to avoid slipping. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled like pine and something sour underneath. The tree was still there, but the photographs were gone. In their place were new ones, clipped neatly to the branches. They were photos of us. Me standing by the engine at the firehouse, the sheriff filling his mug at the diner, both of us taken from angles that made my skin crawl. On the wall above the fireplace, written in red ink, were the words, "He comes when you're warm." We backed out and called it in. State police, county, everyone. The house was searched again. Nothing. No signs of entry, no hidden rooms, no power source for the lights. The photos were bagged as evidence. Christmas Eve came with a blizzard, the kind that erases roads and makes the world feel smaller and meaner. Emergency calls poured in, accidents, heart attacks, people stranded. Around 10 p.m., we got a call from the old St. Bridget's Church. Alarm triggered. No power. I went with 3 others. The church sat on a hill, white clapboard and a tall steeple, usually picturesque. That night, it looked like a shadow against the snow. Inside, it was freezing. Our flashlights cut through the dark, beams landing on pews covered in frost. At the altar stood a Christmas tree. It was decorated with photographs, hundreds of them. The entire town, every face, every family, every generation. Dates on the back, some going back to the 1920s. At the base of the tree was a stack of Christmas cards, all addressed but not yet mailed. I found mine, my name in perfect cursive. Inside, the message read, "Thank you for keeping the fire going." We heard a sound then. Footsteps above us in the choir loft. Slow, measured. We called out. No answer. The temperature dropped suddenly, breath fogging thicker, frost spreading along the wood like veins. My radio crackled with static, then a voice that wasn't dispatch whispered my name. We ran. I don't care how that sounds. We ran out of that church and didn't stop until we were back in the truck, doors locked, engines screaming. Christmas Day dawned quiet, too quiet. The blizzard cleared, leaving everything buried and bright. People stayed inside. Churches canceled services. No carols, no bells. Around noon, my pager went off again. Multiple calls, same address. The Assisted Living Center on Maple Street. By the time we arrived, it was already over. 23 residents dead. All in the common room. Chairs arranged in rows facing a large Christmas tree someone had wheeled in overnight. The heat had been turned off at the main breaker, the windows sealed. The staff swore they'd locked everything, swore the heat was working when they left Christmas Eve. The tree was covered in photographs of the residents in their younger years. Weddings, babies, military uniforms. At the top of the tree, where a star should have been, was a single photo of Walter Hensley, smiling. That night, the sheriff killed himself. He left a note apologizing for not seeing it sooner, for not remembering the stories his grandfather used to tell. Stories about a man who came in winter, who hated warmth and noise and lights, who believed Christmas was a lie people told themselves to forget the cold. The next morning, the heat in half the town failed. Simultaneously. No mechanical reason. No sabotage found. People fled. Those who could packed up and left, ignoring icy roads and warnings. Those who stayed huddled together, fireplaces roaring, generators humming. I stayed too. I don't know why. Duty, maybe? Stupidity. On December 27th, I woke up to a Christmas card taped to my bedroom door. I don't remember going to sleep. The card was simple. Inside it read, "One more." That night, I sat in my living room with every light on, the fireplace blazing. I held my axe across my knees like it might help. The temperature outside dropped below zero. Just before midnight, the lights flickered. The fire died. The cold rushed in like something alive, crawling over my skin, stealing my breath. I heard footsteps on the roof, then in the walls, then right behind me. I don't remember much after that. They found me the next morning, unconscious but alive, hypothermic but breathing. The doctors said it was a miracle. The town never recovered. Too many deaths. Too many unanswered questions. People moved away. Buildings were torn down. St. Bridget's burned to the ground in a fire that started without a source. Every Christmas since, when the heat clicks on a little late or the lights flicker, I feel it again. That waiting cold, that sense of being watched. And every year, without fail, a Christmas card arrives in my mailbox. No return address. Perfect cursive. I don't open them anymore. Story the end. The snow was relentless that Christmas Eve in northern Minnesota. It had been falling for hours, thick, wet flakes that clung to the trees and rooftops, muting the small town of Marlow into an almost silent white void. I was working the night shift at the local 24-hour diner, a skeleton crew of 2 cooks and a waitress who had already called in sick. Around 10 p.m., the first call came in, a frantic voice over the radio of the local sheriff's department. They didn't give many details, just that a car had gone off the road in the forest north of town, and someone might be trapped. Normally that would have been the end of it, another snow accident. But something in the dispatcher's voice made me freeze. She sounded like she was holding back tears, or maybe fear. I grabbed my coat and boots, texting my cousin Tim, who was my usual partner for emergencies. Tim was a volunteer firefighter and EMT. He lived for these kinds of calls. Within 20 minutes, we were driving north along the ice-crusted roads, headlights cutting through the storm. The forest around us was dense, trees heavy with snow, limbs hanging low like claws. Visibility was almost zero. When we finally spotted the car, it was half buried in snow against a small embankment. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, was crouched beside it, shaking, hands covered in blood. I hit something, she stammered, voice trembling. I didn't see it until it was too late. I asked her what she'd hit. She couldn't say. She just shook her head. Tim and I worked quickly to get her into the truck. Her hands were covered in scratches and blood, but none of it was her own. Whatever she'd hit had been torn apart in the headlights. Bits of fur and something that looked almost human clung to the tires and snow. I've seen animal attacks, roadkill, bears in the woods, but this didn't look like anything natural. The dispatcher instructed us to get her to the hospital immediately. We drove cautiously, the woman sitting in the back, silently rocking, staring out the window. Occasionally, she would whisper to herself, "He's out there. He knows we're coming." Tim shot me a worried glance. "Who?" I asked. But she didn't answer. By the time we reached the hospital, it was nearing midnight. The snow had piled higher, and cars were abandoned on the roadsides, half buried. When we brought her inside, the staff took one look at her and called the sheriff. That was the last time we saw her that night. The next day, the hospital wouldn't release her name, citing privacy. The sheriff's office only said she had reported hitting something, but they found nothing in the woods. No carcass, no footprints, nothing. Just a flattened area in the snow. It should have ended there, but it didn't. 2 nights later, I was home trying to ignore the memory when a knock came at my door. It was dark out and the wind howled through the eaves. I opened it to find a small bundle of clothes lying in the snow, a child's mitten poking out from the top. There was no one there, just the mitten and the wind. I picked it up and a shiver ran down my spine. It was wet and heavy. When I brought it inside, I noticed something written on it in red, like blood, but dried. "You shouldn't have gone." I froze. My apartment was on the second floor. No one could have snuck up unnoticed. I called the sheriff, but they didn't arrive for an hour. By the time they got there, the mitten was gone. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the snow leading away, nothing. Over the next few days, the town started talking. People reported strange things: farm dogs disappearing in the middle of the night, lights in the woods that weren't from cars or houses, screams, human screams, echoing across the frozen fields. I began to notice something else: footprints in the snow outside my apartment. Large, uneven, too long to be human. They would appear overnight and vanish by morning. I followed one morning, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was leaving them. It led to the woods, then abruptly stopped, like the snow had swallowed it whole. Christmas Eve came, 3 days later. I stayed home, too scared to go anywhere. The storm returned, heavier than before. Around 10 p.m., I heard it, the scratching. At first, I thought it was the wind, branches scraping the siding. But it was different, methodical, coming from the roof. My heart pounded as I listened to it circle the building, moving with purpose. Then the window in my living room shook. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept toward it. Outside, barely visible through the snow, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, hunched forward. Its arms were too long. Its hands dragged through the snow. Its face, I'll never forget it, was pale and stretched unnaturally with teeth that glinted even in the low light. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't move like a human. It just walked. And it knew where I was. I ran to the door, but it was frozen shut. My phone was dead. The power flickered, then went out completely. The creature scratched at the siding, moving closer. I grabbed a chair, ready to defend myself, but it stopped. Just stood there, watching through the snow. Its head tilted slightly, like it was listening. Then it vanished into the storm. Morning came. I survived the night, but I wasn't safe. My neighbors reported the same thing. A farmer down the road found one of his cows torn apart, but the tracks leading to it weren't right. Large, elongated, splayed toes, impossible strides. Another neighbor found strange symbols carved into the bark of trees around his house, stick figures, circles, lines that made no sense. The sheriff refused to investigate, calling it animal activity or kids playing tricks, but everyone in town knew better. That night, Christmas morning, the storm cleared. I tried to leave town, to get as far away as possible. The roads were plowed, but as I drove past the outskirts of the woods, I saw them. Footprints in the snow. Huge, human-like but wrong, leading straight to the edge of the highway, and then I saw it. The figure from the window, standing at the tree line, watching me. I slammed on the brakes, heart in my throat. It didn't move, just stared. I drove past as fast as I could. By the time I looked in the rearview mirror, it was gone. I've never gone back to Marlow. I moved south as far as I could, but I still see it sometimes, in my dreams, at the edge of forests in the distance. Large footprints in fresh snow, shapes moving in the trees where there shouldn't be anything, and the faintest sound of scraping against siding just beyond the reach of lights. Every Christmas since then, I can't sleep, because I know it's out there, waiting, watching, remembering who left and who stayed. And every year, without fail, I get a text from an unknown number on Christmas Eve. No words, just a single photo. Snow, footprints leading into the woods, and sometimes a shadow too tall to be human. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it chooses certain people. I only know that if you see footprints that are too big, too long, too strange to be human, don't follow them. Don't look back. And whatever you do, never go out into the woods on Christmas Eve. Some things are real, some things are patient, and some things they remember. Story the end. It was Christmas Eve in upstate New York, and the snow had been falling all day, thick and heavy, turning the quiet town into something that looked like a postcard. Peaceful, serene, perfect. But that night, something dark settled over the streets. Something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Daniel, and what I'm about to tell is true. It happened to me, and it happened in a small town that everyone thought was safe, friendly, American Christmas perfect. It wasn't. I worked at a local hardware store, a small place that my parents had owned for decades. On Christmas Eve, we always stayed open late to serve last-minute shoppers, and that year I was closing the store alone because my parents had gone to a family gathering. It was about 9:30 p.m., snow still coming down in sheets, when the last customer left. I locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and turned off the lights. The store felt unnaturally quiet, like the snow outside had swallowed all sound. I started to gather my things when the phone rang. That was odd. The line usually went dead at that hour. I picked it up. A strange, raspy voice whispered, "I see you." I froze. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound calm. There was nothing but static for a moment. Then the voice came back, slower, deliberate. "I'm outside. I can see you." I dropped the receiver. My hands shook. I ran to the window at the front of the store, peering through the frosted glass. Nothing. Just snow, dark streets, and the occasional flicker of a streetlight. I called my parents. No answer. I tried 911. The line was dead. That was the first real moment I realized I was alone, and someone was outside watching. I went to the back door to check, telling myself it was probably a prank. I unlocked the door and looked out into the alley behind the store. Footprints led through the snow, starting from the street, leading up to the back door. Not normal footprints, something larger than a man's, wide and heavy, with uneven spacing, like whoever, or whatever, had been dragging itself. The snow was fresh, so whoever left them had just arrived. I stepped back inside. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed a bat from behind the counter. Old baseball bat, heavy. But even with it in my hands, I felt powerless. That's when I heard it, a scraping sound, low and deliberate, coming from the roof. Metal against metal. Whoever was outside was climbing onto the roof. I ran to the front of the store, planning to barricade myself inside the office. I didn't make it. The front window shattered. Cold air and snow blew in, and I saw it. A figure. Tall, impossibly thin, covered in dark, tattered clothing. Its face was hidden under a hood. But the way it moved, the jerky, unnatural way, made my stomach turn. It wasn't running. It was floating almost, gliding across the snow toward the store. Its arms were long, fingers extended, almost touching the ground. I swung the bat, screamed. It didn't stop. I ran to the office and locked the door. I called out, desperate, but my voice sounded wrong to me, high-pitched and tiny. The sound of the figure outside, scraping, tapping, dragging, echoed through the store. I could hear it at the windows, the doors, even from the ceiling. Then it whispered through the cracks in the door. "I see you," it said again, slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the fear. "I know you're alone." I couldn't breathe. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down, trying to calm myself, praying it was a dream. But it wasn't. Then my phone buzzed. My parents had called back. I answered, sobbing, trying to explain what was happening. Before I could finish, the line went dead. I glanced up and it was inside the office. I swear on my life it didn't move like a normal human. One moment it was outside the door, the next its face was inches from mine through the glass window of the office door, and I could see it then, the face. Hollow eyes, skin pale and stretched too tight, lips pulled back in a grin that didn't make sense, teeth long and jagged. It reached out its hand slowly toward the lock. I slammed the bat down on the window. It hissed. Low, wet, terrifying. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The office was empty. I didn't breathe for a long time. I stayed pressed against the wall until dawn, too scared to move. When the morning came, the snow had covered everything. Footprints gone, broken glass cleaned up as if nothing had happened. The store looked normal. My parents came to check on me, thinking I had just spent a sleepless night, but I knew. It wasn't gone. Weeks later, I found the footprints again. Not in snow, but in my mind. I would see them in reflections, in shadows. I would hear that scraping, that whispering, always telling me it knew I was alone, that it could see me. That Christmas, I didn't leave the house. I didn't sleep well. And every year since, when the snow falls and the lights go up, I remember the figure on the roof, the whisper through the cracks, the hollow eyes staring at me from the window. I still live in that town. No one else knows, or maybe they just don't believe. I've seen it again every few years, always around Christmas Eve. Standing outside my window, tapping, waiting, and every time it whispers the same thing, "I see you." I know now that it isn't just watching for fun, it's waiting. And if you ever hear scratching or whispering on a snowy night, don't look outside. Don't answer the phone. Whatever it is, whatever it wants, once it knows you're alone, it won't stop. Even now, years later, I hear bells in the snow outside my house when no one is there. I know it's watching, and I know what it will do if I ever make the mistake of being alone on Christmas Eve again. Story the end. The snow came down heavy that Christmas Eve in upstate New York. The kind that blankets everything so completely it feels like the world has been silenced. The kind of snow that hides things. I had just finished setting up the last of the lights outside my parents' old farmhouse when my phone buzzed. It was my sister, Jenna. She was calling from the city, saying she was stuck on the side of the highway, her car sliding on ice and snow, and she was alone with my nephew and niece. I told her to stay put, that I'd come get her. But by the time I got dressed and bundled up in every layer I had, the snow had already piled up to my knees. The roads were slick, black ice waiting under the fluffy surface. I drove cautiously, headlights cutting through the blizzard, the radio silent except for static. I was halfway to the highway exit when I noticed tire tracks in the snow, heading off the road into the woods. At first, I thought it was a snowplow or a delivery truck. But the tracks didn't match any vehicle I'd seen. They were narrow, deeply etched, and looked almost deliberate, as if someone had taken their time driving through the snow rather than skidding out of control. I didn't stop at first. My sister needed me. But after a few more miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following me. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the tree line seemed to shift. Shadows loomed unnaturally close, though I could see nothing in the headlights. A sudden jolt made me slam the brakes. In the clearing up ahead, a figure stood in the middle of the road. Red. A long coat, trimmed with fur. Santa Claus, I thought for a second, laughing nervously at the joke of my imagination. But the figure didn't wave or smile. It just stood there, motionless, staring. The headlights revealed a face pale, lined, and twisted into a grin that made my stomach turn. It wasn't jolly, it was grotesque. I swerved onto the shoulder, my tires crunching over hidden ice, and the figure vanished. My pulse raced. I shook it off. I had a job to do, get Jenna and the kids safely home. The thought of going back, calling the police, seemed absurd. Who would believe me anyway? I reached the highway and saw Jenna's car a few miles up, her hazard lights blinking. I pulled over behind her and jumped out, snow already soaking my boots. She was huddled inside, the kids asleep, her face pale and drawn. She swore the road had been fine a mile back, then suddenly the car had slid, and she had no control. "Get in," I said, and helped her kids into my SUV. But as I turned back to her, I noticed footprints in the snow leading from the tree line to her car. They were human-sized but oddly thin, uneven, like someone had long, flexible limbs. I called out, but the blizzard muffled my voice. When I shone my flashlight toward the tracks, nothing was there, just shadows stretching between the trees. I got everyone inside the SUV and started driving back toward the farmhouse. At first, the ride was silent except for the whir of the heater. But after 10 minutes, I noticed a red glow in the rearview mirror. Headlights? No. A shape. At first, it looked like a deer, but it moved unnaturally, upright, long arms swinging, slow, deliberate. I blinked, and it was gone. The snow was heavy enough to cover the tracks, but I knew it had followed us. By the time we reached the driveway, snow had piled over the mailbox. I parked and got everyone inside, shutting the door quickly behind us. The house was warm, almost too warm, and the smell of pine from the Christmas tree mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood in my own sweat. Jenna was shaking, and the kids were finally awake now, staring at me with wide eyes. I tried to explain it away, nerves, the storm, but even as I spoke, the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't just imagination. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I told myself it was just the wind. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, methodical, coming from the kitchen. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept toward the sound. The kitchen door was cracked, and a figure stood there, tall, clothed in red, looking down at the floor. The face was pale, a carved-like grin splitting it unnaturally wide. It didn't move when I raised the bat, didn't speak, it just tilted its head. I shouted, and the figure vanished. Just like that. Jenna called the police the next morning, but they didn't find anything unusual. No footprints leading away, no sign anyone had been in the house, no explanation. They suggested stress, the storm, maybe a prank. But when I checked the living room, I found something. A small wooden ornament carved in the shape of a Santa Claus lying on the mantel. I hadn't bought it. Jenna hadn't brought it. It had a smile too wide, eyes deep and dark, and smeared on the bottom, I swear, was blood. We left the next day, sold the house, but I still remember that first Christmas after, when the family went to the city to buy a tree. I couldn't go. I stayed home, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. And yet, in every holiday display I passed, I saw red coats, wide smiles, eyes that watched from shadows. A few years later, a local news story came across my feed. A family stranded in a snowstorm upstate, their van missing for days. When authorities found it, the 2 children were gone. The mother was found dead nearby. The man, or men responsible, never identified. Witnesses reported seeing figures in red wandering the woods that night. Every Christmas since, I dream of that night. Snowflakes swirling, headlights cutting through the white, and the sound of boots crunching in the distance. Slow, deliberate, always watching. I check my locks, my doors, my windows. I tell myself it's over, that I'll never see it again. But deep down, I know better. Last year, I was walking through a holiday market in the city, and I saw Santa Claus taking pictures with kids. At first, he seemed normal, but then he looked up, and I saw the eyes. Too dark, too knowing, a smile that wasn't jolly but patient, waiting. I blinked, and he was gone. No one else seemed to notice. I don't know why it happened that night or why we survived when others didn't. All I know is that every Christmas, the snow reminds me of what's out there, waiting, watching, patient. And every time I smell pine and something coppery underneath, I remember that figure in the woods, the one in the red coat, smiling wide, saying nothing but meaning everything. I moved south after that, away from snow and forests. But the nightmares come anyway. I hear the crunch of boots on a porch that should be empty. I wake to find a small carved Santa on my windowsill. Never the same one twice, but always the same smile, wide and impossible. One Christmas I thought I could hide it, burn the ornaments. But the next morning another one appeared. Always red coat, always smile. And I know it isn't a joke. It isn't a dream. It's real. And it comes every year, patient as ever, waiting for someone alone in the snow, waiting for the sound of human fear to echo across the trees. No one believes me. The police, my friends, my family, they all think it's grief or trauma. Maybe it is. But I know the truth. Every Christmas, it comes back. Every Christmas, I hear the boots crunching in the snow, and the wind carries a voice that whispers just for me, Merry Christmas. Story the end. The snow came down in thick sheets that December night, the kind that muffled everything except the roar of the wind. I had just finished my shift at the diner in a small town outside Buffalo, New York, and was heading home to my parents' farmhouse, a good 20 miles out of town. Christmas Eve 2004. I remember because the radio kept playing the same old Bing Crosby songs, static cracking through the speakers, giving the night an eerie soundtrack. The roads were already treacherous. Ice coated the asphalt, and my old Chevy truck slid more than it gripped. I drove cautiously, the headlights cutting through the dense snow, illuminating the trees on either side that leaned close, heavy with frost, like they were trying to watch me pass. I'd always hated this stretch of road at night, but that night something felt different, like the woods themselves were waiting. I was nearly home when I saw the first car. It was overturned in the ditch, smoke curling from the hood, hazard lights weakly blinking. I slowed, heart hammering. No one was in the car. No footprints led to it. Nothing, just a frozen abandoned vehicle, half buried in snow. I've been around accidents before, but this felt wrong. Too quiet. Too staged. Then I heard it, a faint, desperate scraping sound from the woods nearby. I froze. My truck idled. The scraping stopped. I shook my head, blaming wind against broken branches. But then came the low whisper. Help, please. It was human. My heart leapt. I knew I shouldn't leave my truck, not in this storm, but something inside me screamed. I grabbed my coat and flashlight and stepped out into the snow. The wind hit me like a wall. Snow whipped into my eyes, making it hard to see more than a few feet. The voice came again, closer. Help me, please. I followed the sound toward the tree line. Snow was ankle deep, and I sank with each step. Then I saw him. A boy. maybe 8 or 9, shivering, covered in snow, no coat, blue lips. He looked up at me, eyes wide with terror. "They're coming," he whispered, voice trembling. "They're going to get me." "Who? Who's going to get you?" I asked, panic tightening my chest. He didn't answer. He just grabbed my hand and pulled me deeper into the woods toward a path I didn't know existed. I hesitated, but I couldn't leave him there. We had gone maybe 50 yards when I heard it behind us. Something moving through the trees, heavy, deliberate, not like an animal, like it knew exactly where we were. I turned, shined the flashlight, and saw it, a tall, thin figure. The way it moved was wrong, joints bending impossibly, arms swinging too long, its head tilted slowly as if it were curious. I pulled the boy closer. "Run," I whispered. We bolted back toward the road. The truck was gone. Not stolen, just gone. My heart stopped. The boy screamed, and I spun around just in time to see the thing step onto the road where the truck had been. Its pale, elongated fingers reached toward us. Then it vanished into the storm. I didn't wait. I ran, dragging the boy across icy patches, snow sucking at our boots. Finally, I saw lights, my parents' farmhouse. Relief flooded me. But as we approached, I noticed the front door was wide open. My stomach dropped. Inside, the house was dark, the fireplace cold. My parents weren't home. The lights flickered as the wind howled outside. I set the boy down. "Sit here, I'll check the rest." I grabbed a flashlight and crept through the living room. The Christmas tree lights were still blinking faintly. Stockings hung untouched. I called for my parents. Nothing. Then I heard it again. From the basement, soft, dragging steps, not human. Something heavy moving along concrete. I froze. "Don't go down there," the boy whispered. But I had no choice. I grabbed a kitchen knife for protection and descended. The basement door creaked as I opened it. The steps stopped. Silence. I shone the flashlight around. Everything looked normal. Old boxes, the washer, the dryer. Then I saw it, a handprint on the wall, high, too long to belong to a human, wet and glistening in the flashlight beam. Before I could react, the steps started again, closer this time. I turned toward the stairs. Something was coming up. Slow, deliberate. I yanked the boy behind me. He was shaking violently. "They want me," he cried. "They're taking me back." The first figure appeared at the foot of the stairs. Then another, and another. Pale, thin, impossibly tall, staring at us with empty, endless eyes. The air grew icy. The basement lights flickered on, then off, plunging us into darkness. I screamed, slashing with the knife. The things didn't flinch, they just moved closer. One stepped onto the landing, towering over me, fingers reaching out. I grabbed the boy, ran for the laundry door, and slammed it open. It led outside into the snow. We didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, banging on the door, screaming for help. The neighbors were drunk and confused, but finally came out. I told them everything, the boy, the things in the basement, the car in the ditch. By the time the police arrived, the farmhouse was quiet, empty. No footprints anywhere except ours. The boy, he was gone. They searched for hours, but there was no trace, no footprints in the snow beyond the path we'd taken. No tracks inside the house, nothing. Only the sense that the house itself had been waiting. My parents came home the next day, having been delayed by the storm, completely unaware of what happened. The police refused to file a report, calling it a prank or hysteria. But I knew what I saw. I knew what the boy saw. Years later, I returned to that road. The ditch where the car had been was empty, the woods silent. But every Christmas Eve I dream about those tall, thin figures. Their faces aren't human. Their eyes are hollow, and they're always waiting, always patient. I never went near the farmhouse again, and I never stayed home on Christmas Eve. The boy never returned. And to this day, when I hear a faint knock at a window during a snowstorm, I know what it means. It's waiting, watching, patient. Story the end. The snow started falling around 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve, early enough to cover the streets of Westfield, Massachusetts, in a thick white blanket by the time darkness set in. People were hurrying to finish last-minute shopping, dragging kids behind them, umbrellas flipping in the wind. My brother Dave and I were driving back from a late grocery run, the car packed with bags of turkey, sides, and a bottle of wine we'd promised ourselves as a treat after cleaning the house for the holidays. The roads were slick, and the sky had that heavy gray look that makes everything feel smaller, closer, like the world is holding its breath. We took a back road home, a shortcut that ran behind the old mill district. It was mostly empty, the snow muffling all sound except the crunch of our tires. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, completely still, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly. At first, I thought it was a kid trying to play in the snow, maybe drunk or careless. Dave swerved instinctively, but not fast enough. The figure didn't move. The tires skidded, sliding past him close enough that I saw the face clearly. Pale, grayish, eyes wide open and unblinking, like he'd been carved from wax. His mouth hung slightly open, frozen mid-scream. We slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop 50 feet ahead. The man, or whatever he was gone. Nothing but the undisturbed snow. Dave muttered something under his breath about some freak stunt, but I knew that look, the unnatural stillness, the eyes that didn't belong to a living person. We got home in silence. Mom was waiting by the fireplace, a mug of hot cocoa in her hand. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, the kind of cozy smell that makes you forget everything outside. We unpacked groceries and sat down, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow in the corners of the living room seemed to stretch, pulse, almost breathe. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I went to check on the backyard lights. They were flickering under the weight of the snow, and as I adjusted the plug, I noticed footprints leading from the side gate toward the garage. They were huge, at least a foot long, and deep, like someone heavy had been walking on the soft snow. But no one should have been there. The gate was locked. I froze, staring at the tracks. They stopped at the garage and circled around the house, coming back toward the front yard, fading into nothing where the snow had drifted. I told Dave about it when he came to investigate with me, but he brushed it off. "Maybe an animal," he said. "A big dog or a raccoon." But the prints weren't animal. They had 5 toes, spaced too far apart, and a deep, unnatural indentation in the heel, almost like a claw. We went to bed uneasy, doors locked, lights on. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy object across the roof. The old Victorian house groaned under the weight of the snow, but this was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate, moving from the back roof toward the front. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept to the window. The front yard was empty, except for the faint glow of the Christmas lights reflecting off the snow. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees along the edge of the property. It was tall, hunched slightly, and it didn't walk. It moved in jerky, unnatural steps like someone testing their own legs. And then it stopped. Right at the edge of the snowbank, just outside the reach of the light. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it looking at me. I woke Dave. He swore he'd call the police, but we both knew what a 2 a.m. call about a creepy shadow sounded like. We tried to stay awake, watching through the blinds, but exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking to the sound of glass shattering. The living room windows, every single one. I bolted out of bed, heart hammering, and froze. The room was empty. No one inside. Just shards of glass everywhere. And the Christmas tree lights off. I tried to turn them back on. Dead. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the stairs, descending. They stopped at the hallway. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. Silence. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed and crept down the stairs. The hall was empty. Nothing moved. The house smelled different, metallic, like blood. That's when I heard Dave scream from the kitchen. I ran in and found him slumped over the counter, face pale, eyes wide, staring at the floor. And there it was, a doll. Not one of the ones Mom collected or any of ours. Large, homemade, raggedy, wearing a tattered Santa coat. Its eyes were black buttons, sewn too close together, mouth stitched in a permanent smile. But the worst part, it was wet. The snow from outside had melted in a strange, sticky way, like it was breathing through it. Dave tried to pick it up, and the thing moved. Just slightly, just enough to make us scream. Then it tipped over, silent again. We didn't sleep. We barricaded ourselves in my room, windows covered like doors locked. Outside, the storm had picked up howling like it wanted inside. Around 4 a.m., we heard it. A soft scratching at the front door like nails on wood, and then a voice. Low, whispering, carrying over the wind, "Open the door. It's Christmas." I froze. Dave clutched my arm. We didn't move. The whisper went on for what felt like hours. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it penetrated anyway. When dawn came, the snowstorm had passed. The streets were clear, neighbors starting to emerge. We opened the door cautiously. The yard was empty. No footprints. No evidence anyone had been outside except the snow itself. We called the police, but they found nothing. No forced entry, no broken windows except our own. Nothing in the backyard. Just snow. That year, we didn't celebrate Christmas. Mom and Dad were confused, but neither of us could explain what happened. We tried to forget it. We left the house in February and never returned. Every Christmas Eve since, I hear the whispers, soft and low, just outside my door. A scraping on the roof, a shadow in the corner of the yard. And every year, without fail, there's a doll left on my doorstep. Never the same, always wearing something festive. Always wet. Always smiling. I've learned not to open the door. I've learned not to look too closely. And I've learned that some nights, Christmas isn't about warmth and family. It's about being watched by something that doesn't belong in the world of the living. Something that waits for the snow to fall, the streets to empty, and for someone foolish enough to answer a knock. It's still out there. And every Christmas Eve, it waits for me. Story the end. Snow had been falling since noon, a slow, silent curtain drifting over the pines that edged the outskirts of Coldwater, Montana. By 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve, the sun had vanished behind a wall of steel-gray clouds, leaving the town swallowed in an early winter dusk. The roads were empty except for an occasional pickup lumbering past with a tree tied in the bed or a set of chains clinking around its tires. Megan drove her old Subaru along Route 12, wipers thudding in a steady rhythm as she tried to focus on the path carved through fresh snow. She had promised her parents she'd make it home before dinner, her first Christmas back after 5 years away, but a late shift at the veterinary clinic had pushed everything back. Now the storm was heavier, her phone had no signal, and the world ahead seemed to blur into one long stretch of white nothing. She turned the heat up and leaned forward, squinting at the road. Just a few more miles. Coldwater was small enough that even storms like this usually didn't stop much, but this one felt different, heavier, as though the sky were pressing down on everything. The first sign that something was wrong came when she passed the Miller place. The farmhouse usually glowed with warm lights and enough decorations to be seen from the highway, but tonight it was pitch black. No Christmas lights, no flicker from the windows. The barn door stood wide open, snow gathering in drifts inside. Her stomach tightened. The Millers never left anything open in winter. The animals alone guaranteed that. She slowed but didn't stop. A strange instinct, an old primal warning, crawled up her spine, urging her on. Another mile down, the radio crackled. A burst of static. Then a voice, deep, male, distorted like it came through a long tunnel. Get inside. Stay. The rest dissolved into static. The station was the town's tiny AM channel, which normally played carols nonstop this week. She turned the knob, but all she got was more static. Then, abruptly, too late. He's already out. Static swallowed the voice. Megan switched the radio off entirely. Her hands trembled on the wheel. She told herself it was interference from the storm, nothing more, but her pulse wouldn't steady. A few minutes later, she spotted movement ahead. A man stood by the roadside, waving his arms. His dark parka blended with the trees behind him, but something bright caught her eye. Blood smeared across his gloves. She hit the brakes so hard the Subaru fishtailed before regaining traction. The man stumbled toward her, limping, face half covered by a torn scarf. He knocked on the passenger window with frantic urgency. She hesitated only a second before unlocking the door. The moment he climbed in, wet snow and the smell of copper flooded the car. "Oh, God," he panted. Thank you. You gotta drive, please." "What happened?" she asked, pulling forward again. He shook his head violently. "Keep going. Don't stop. He's out here. He was at the Miller place. Then the Hargreaves." Then he choked, swallowing hard. "I ran. Who was at the Miller place?" she asked. The man didn't answer at first. He kept staring out the back window as though expecting someone or something to appear in the storm behind them. Finally, he whispered, "The Christmas man." Megan almost laughed, thinking she must have misheard. "The who?" He turned toward her. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, terrified. "He comes every few years when the cold gets bad. My granddad talked about him, thought it was a story, but it's not. He finds people who are alone, houses with lights turned off, roads where no one's watching. He's throng, and he carries a sack." Her skin prickled. "You mean like a real person? Someone dangerous? You should go to the sheriff." You don't understand, the man whispered. He's not human. Before she could reply, something hit the roof of the Subaru. Hard, metal buckled with a dull thud. She jerked the wheel. The car skidded sideways, sliding into a shallow ditch. The engine sputtered but stayed on. The man screamed, pressing himself against the dashboard. He found us! Drive! She slammed her foot on the gas. The Subaru lurched forward, clawing through the snow until it climbed back onto the road. Another thud on the roof. Then a scraping sound, like long fingernails dragging across metal. Megan didn't look. She kept her eyes glued to the road as the wipers struggled to push away the thickening snow. "What is that?" she gasped. The man covered his ears. "Don't look. If you look, he sees you better. Just keep driving." Something slid down the passenger side window, an indistinct, shadowy shape. A pale hand, too long, fingers jointed oddly, tapped the glass once. The window fogged instantly, like breath on a mirror, though Megan knew no human breath could be that cold. She hit the acceleration again, heart pounding so loudly she heard it over the engine. The scraping moved to the back of the car. Another heavy thump. Then suddenly the weight lifted. For a moment there was only the roar of wind. The man exhaled shakily, collapsing back into his seat. He's just playing. He plays with people before he takes them. "What does he want?" she asked, voice trembling. He swallowed. "Company." Megan realized they were nearing Coldwater's limits. The familiar sign stood crooked under a heavy coat of snow, the words barely visible. Beyond it, the first row of houses glowed faintly through the storm. "Almost there," she whispered. Then her headlights illuminated something standing in the middle of the road, tall, lanky, wrapped in what looked like old winter clothes, patched wool, frayed red fabric, boots that didn't match. A hood covered most of its head, but the chin that jutted out was wrong, stretched. In its left hand hung a sack that sagged and twitched as though something inside moved. She screamed and swerved. The Subaru slid sideways and spun, tires unable to grip the ice beneath the fresh snow. The world turned in circles of white and dark, white and dark. The car crashed into a snowbank, engine stalling. The airbags exploded, slamming Megan back. Her ears rang. Everything hurt. Next to her, the man groaned softly. Through the shattered windshield, she saw it standing only 10 feet away, unmoving except for the gentle sway of its sack. Snow hissed around it, but didn't seem to land on it. It leaned forward slightly, the hood shifting just enough to reveal a sliver of its face, grayish skin stretched tight over bone, mouth too wide, lips cracked like old paint. Megan's breath caught in her throat. The man beside her whispered, "Don't move. Don't breathe." But Megan's body trembled uncontrollably. Her breath came out in sharp white puffs. The figure tilted its head. The mouth stretched upward in a crooked, unnatural smile. Then it took a step forward. Something inside Megan snapped. She shoved her door hard and stumbled into the storm. Pain shot through her leg, but she forced herself to run, half falling, half dragging herself toward the closest house. Lights glowed warm behind frosted windows. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The wind howled, and behind it she heard something else. Footsteps, slow and rhythmic, crunching through the snow. Her boots slipped as she reached the porch of the nearest house. She pounded on the door, screaming. The footsteps drew closer. The door opened. A middle-aged woman stood there, eyes wide. "Good Lord, are you okay?" "Let me in," Megan sobbed. "Please." The woman grabbed her arm and pulled her inside, slamming the door behind them. Megan collapsed onto the hardwood floor, gasping. "What happened? Were you in an accident?" the woman asked, locking the deadbolt. "There's something out there," Megan whispered. "Something following me." The woman peered through the side window. "I don't see anything." "Please," Megan said, "just don't open the door. Don't go outside." The woman nodded slowly. "All right, I won't." But a moment later, there came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The sound echoed through the quiet house. The woman stiffened. Maybe someone else needs help. "No," Megan rasped. "Don't open it." Another knock. Louder. Then a voice soft, strangely deep, sliding under the door like cold air. "Let me in. It's Christmas." Megan's blood turned to ice. The woman stepped backward. Who is that?" The voice again. "Let me in. I'm so cold." The handle twitched. A long shadow slid across the frosted window, distorting into an impossible shape. The woman whispered, "Jesus, help us." The knock stopped. Silence pressed tight around them. Minutes passed. 10. 20. Eventually, the woman helped Megan into a guest room, gave her a blanket, and promised to call the sheriff once the storm eased enough for the phone lines to reconnect. But Megan didn't sleep. Outside, beneath the howl of wind, she heard something dragging across the snow, circling the house, waiting. By dawn, the storm had passed. Coldwater looked peaceful, the streets blanketed in pristine white. But the sheriff found the Subaru empty, the passenger door torn clean off, and enormous footprints, far too large, far too deep, leading into the woods. No one ever found the man Megan had picked up. The Miller and Hargreaves houses remained dark long after Christmas. And that night, as Megan sat awake in her parents' living room, every shadow outside their window stirred with the memory of that distorted voice whispering through the snow, "Let me in." Story the end. The snow started falling the afternoon of December 23rd, the kind that looks pretty from inside a warm house but turns ugly once you have to drive through it. I remember that because I was on my way to my mother's place in rural western Pennsylvania, the same drive I'd done every Christmas since my dad died. The radio kept cutting out, and when it worked, it was all warnings about ice and low visibility. I almost turned back twice, but my mother had been insistent. She didn't like being alone on Christmas, not since the accident. By the time I turned onto the county road that led to her house, it was dark. No streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the snow and the bare branches clawing over the road. The forest there always felt too close, like it was leaning in to listen. I slowed down, remembering the deer that liked to wander across that stretch. That was when I saw the car. It was pulled halfway off the road, hazard lights blinking weakly, already half buried in snow. A red sedan, older model. I drove past it at first, then stopped. Out here, cell service was spotty at best. Leaving someone stranded on Christmas Eve felt wrong. I backed up and rolled down my window. A man stood beside the car, bundled in a dark coat, his breath fogging in the cold. He raised a hand in a slow wave. "Car won't start," he said when I stepped out. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Battery's dead." I offered to give him a jump. He thanked me, his smile tight and brief. As we hooked up the cables, I noticed something off. The inside of his car was spotless, no bags, no gifts, nothing you'd expect from someone traveling right before Christmas. The trunk was open, empty, except for a folded tarp. "Headed to see family?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence. He looked at me for a second too long. Something like that. The jump didn't work. He tried again and again, the engine clicking uselessly. Finally, he sighed and shut the hood. "Nearest house?" he asked. I pointed down the road. "About a mile. My mother's place." He hesitated, then nodded. "Mind if I walk with you? It's getting bad out here." Every instinct told me not to, but I told myself I was being paranoid. It was Christmas. People helped each other. I said yes. We walked in silence, snow crunching under our boots. He kept his hands in his pockets, head down. I tried to make conversation, but his answers were short, vague. When we reached my mother's house, the lights were on, the familiar glow of the tree visible through the window. I felt a rush of relief. My mother answered the door with a smile that faded when she saw the stranger behind me. "He broke down," I said quickly. "Just needs to warm up. Maybe use the phone." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course, it's Christmas." Inside, the house smelled like pine and cinnamon. The man took off his coat and hung it carefully by the door. I noticed then how thin he was, almost gaunt, his eyes dark and sunken. He sat at the kitchen table while my mother poured him coffee. His hands shook as he lifted the mug. "Thank you," he said. "You're very kind." The power flickered as the wind howled outside. My mother frowned. "Storm's getting worse. You might have to stay the night." He looked up sharply, then smiled again. "If you don't mind." I didn't like that smile. It didn't reach his eyes. We ate dinner together, an awkward 3-person Christmas Eve meal. He barely touched his food, just pushed it around the plate. He watched us instead, like he was studying how we spoke, how we laughed at old stories. When my mother excused herself to get dessert from the basement freezer, he leaned toward me. "You live here?" he asked. "No, I moved to Ohio." He nodded slowly. "But you came back?" "Yes. For her. Yes." He smiled again. "Family is important." My mother screamed from the basement. I was out of my chair before I realized it, running to the basement door. The stairs were steep and narrow, the light flickering. I found her at the bottom, sprawled on the concrete floor, blood spreading beneath her head. Her eyes were open, staring past me. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, heart pounding, and saw him standing at the top of the stairs, holding a hammer. It was my father's hammer. I recognized the worn handle instantly. "She fell," he said calmly. "Terrible accident." I screamed at him to stay back, to put it down. He started down the stairs instead, slow and deliberate. "She was going to call someone," he said. "I couldn't let that happen." I don't remember everything clearly after that. I remember grabbing the first thing I could reach, a box cutter from the workbench. I remember lunging at him, the shock of contact, his breath rushing out in a wet gasp. I remember him falling, tumbling down the stairs, the hammer clattering away. When it was over, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. He lay at the bottom of the stairs, blood pooling around him, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The storm knocked out the power completely. The house went dark and silent except for my breathing. I sat there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think. When the police finally arrived the next morning, after I'd managed to walk to a neighbor's house miles away through the snow, they asked me a lot of questions. They photographed the scene, took my statement, put me in the back of a cruiser while they worked. They found things in his coat pockets, newspaper clippings, old ones. Women who'd gone missing around Christmas over the past 20 years, all in rural towns, all near highways. Some had been found dead. Some had never been found at all. They found a list, folded neatly, names crossed out in careful pen. At the bottom was my mother's name. He'd been watching the house, they said, watching her routines, waiting for the right moment. The broken-down car was a trick he'd used before. The official report ruled my mother's death an accident, exacerbated by the stress of the confrontation. They ruled his death self-defense. They told me I was lucky to be alive. I sold the house in the spring. I couldn't stand to be there anymore. Every Christmas since, I stay in my apartment, lights off, TV on for noise. I don't drive on country roads in winter. I don't stop for stranded cars. Last year, a few days before Christmas, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. A story about a young woman who disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1998. At the bottom, in handwriting I recognized instantly, were the words "Almost Family." Story, the end. It was the winter I learned that something can be both ordinary and unforgivable at the same time. I was 32, living in a split-level house outside Toledo, Ohio, working nights as a dispatcher for a private security company. Christmas Eve that year fell on a Tuesday. Snow had been coming down since morning, not heavy enough to shut anything down, just enough to mute the world and make everything feel insulated and unreal. My wife, Erin, had taken our daughter to her parents' place in Michigan earlier that afternoon. I stayed behind because of my shift, planning to drive up after midnight. The neighborhood was quiet in that way only American suburbs get on Christmas Eve. Every house lit up with inflatables, blinking lights, plastic Santas frozen mid-wave. By the time my shift ended around 11:30 p.m., the roads were nearly empty. I scraped the windshield, let the engine warm, back and drove home first to grab my overnight bag. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the porch light was on. I was sure I'd turned it off before leaving. It didn't strike me as threatening at first. Erin was meticulous about lights, but she also worried about burglars. I told myself I'd just forgotten. Inside, the house was warm, and the smell of pine from the tree still lingered. The living room looked untouched. Presents sat under the tree, some half-opened from the small celebration we'd had the night before, so our daughter wouldn't miss Santa. I walked through, calling Erin's name out of habit, then laughed at myself. That was when I heard a sound from the basement. It was a dull, rhythmic thump, like someone knocking from the other side of a wall. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. I stood there listening, keys still in my hand, the Christmas lights blinking softly behind me. We didn't have pets. The basement was unfinished, mostly storage and the old washer and dryer. I told myself it was a pipe or the furnace. Still, I felt that creeping reluctance, the sense that something was wrong but not yet explainable. I went down anyway. The basement lights flickered on, revealing concrete floors and rows of plastic bins. The sound stopped the moment my foot hit the bottom step. I stood there, listening to the furnace hum. No thumping, no movement. I was turning to go back upstairs when I saw the door to the crawl space was open. I know, even now, that I always kept it closed. It was one of those low doors tucked into the wall, leading under the house. Aaron hated it because spiders liked it down there. I hated it because it felt like a mouth. The air coming from it was colder than the rest of the basement. I leaned down and pulled the door wider, shining my phone light inside. All I saw were dirt, insulation, and darkness. Then, faintly, from somewhere under the house, I heard breathing. It wasn't an animal. It was too slow, too deliberate. I slammed the door shut and ran back upstairs, my heart pounding so hard I felt sick. I locked the basement door and told myself I was overreacting. Stress, night shifts, horror stories that get shared around this time of year. I grabbed my bag and headed for the front door. It wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door didn't move. I pulled harder, then tried the deadbolt. It was unlocked, but something was braced against the other side. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how quiet the house had become. The furnace had shut off. The lights seemed too dim. That's when I heard the thumping again, this time from inside the walls. It traveled slowly, like someone crawling through the studs, stopping occasionally, then continuing. I stood frozen, every childhood fear roaring back. I shouted, my voice cracking, demanding to know who was there. The thumping stopped right behind me. I felt breath on the back of my neck. I turned, swinging my bag like a weapon, and hit nothing. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled wrong, damp, sour. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife from the block, and backed myself into the corner by the refrigerator. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Aaron, texting to ask if I'd left yet. Before I could respond, the ceiling above me creaked. Something shifted in the crawl space overhead between the floors. Then a section of drywall above the pantry cracked, sagged, and split open. A man dropped through. He hit the floor hard, screaming as his leg bent at an angle it shouldn't. He was thin, filthy, his beard matted, eyes wild. He clutched at me, sobbing, babbling words I couldn't understand. I stabbed him. I didn't think. I reacted. Twice. I screamed louder than he did. When it was over, I stood there shaking, the knife slick in my hand, staring at the body on my kitchen floor, beneath the Christmas decorations. The police came, then the ambulance, then more police. They told me later his name was Robert Haskins. He'd been missing for 6 months, presumed dead after abandoning his car near a rest stop. He had severe mental illness. He'd been living in crawl spaces and attics across 3 counties, entering houses when families were away, like surviving on pantry food and whatever he could steal. They found signs he'd been in our house for weeks. He'd watched us, learned our schedules. He'd eaten at our table when we were gone, slept beneath our daughter's room. On Christmas Eve, when he realized I was alone, something in him broke. They ruled it self-defense. Everyone told me I was lucky to be alive. But the house never felt clean again. We sold it in the spring. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 years later, I was living in rural Pennsylvania, renting a small farmhouse while working remotely. Aaron and I had divorced, the strain of that night eroding us slowly. I spent Christmas alone again by choice this time. On December 24th, around 9 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Through the window, I saw a man in a red coat holding a cardboard box. He smiled when he saw me. "Delivery," he said. I didn't order anything. I told him through the door to leave it on the porch. He hesitated, then set the box down. As he walked away, he turned and said, "He liked your house in Ohio." My blood ran cold. By the time I opened the door again, the man was gone. The box was still there. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was a small plastic Santa figurine, the same one that had been missing from my old basement. I called the police. They never found the man. The figurine had no prints. That night, I sat in the dark with every light on, the farmhouse groaning around me in the cold. Around midnight, I heard something moving beneath the floorboards. Slow, careful, familiar. I left the house and never went back. I live in apartments now, top floors only, no basements, no crawl spaces. Every Christmas Eve, I leave town. Some things don't die when you kill them. Some things just learn new ways in. Story the end. Snow rattled softly against the window of the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department as Deputy Karen Leary flipped through the incident reports from the last 24 hours. Christmas Eve shifts were usually quiet. Some drunk driving, a few domestic calls, maybe a stranded motorist. but nothing like what would begin at 9:17 p.m. when a freezing, half-coherent woman staggered into the station lobby with no coat, no shoes, and dried blood crusted on her hands. Her name was Amy Wallace. 32, local, elementary school teacher. She lived out near the old Cranberry Bogs, an area that looked serene in daytime but turned pitch black after sunset. She kept repeating the same phrase to the dispatcher who rushed to her. "They're back in the barn. They're still moving. God, I heard them moving." Karen and Sheriff Doyle exchanged a look. The woman wasn't drunk. She wasn't high. Her pupils reacted normally. But she was shaking like she had hypothermia and kept staring at the station's Christmas tree as if it made her nauseous. "Ma'am," Karen said softly, crouching beside her, "who is still moving?" Amy spoke through clenched teeth. "My family." The story came together slowly, in broken, trembling sentences that made the hair on Karen's arms stand up. The Wallaces had hosted Christmas Eve dinner every year. This time it was just Amy and her husband Michael, along with his parents, Harold and Denise. Their barn, an old, drafty building they mostly used for storage, had a reputation in town. People whispered that it used to belong to a farmer who'd hung himself in it during the Great Depression. Kids dared each other to sneak inside on Halloween. No one ever saw anything, but everyone felt something. "I heard footsteps in there 2 nights ago," Amy told them, rubbing her arms as if trying to warm herself. But Michael said it was just the wind. They decorated lightly for the holidays. Some lights on the porch, a wreath, and inside, a tall Douglas fir covered in white ribbon and warm yellow bulbs. Dinner started at 6:30. Everything was normal until they heard a crash outside, like metal hitting the ground. Michael grabbed a flashlight and went to check. He didn't come back. After 5 minutes, Harold muttered something about the damn boy needing help with something and went out too. Denise waited another 5 minutes before her maternal fear sent her pacing. Amy tried calling Michael's phone, but it just rang and rang. Finally, Denise went outside as well, and then it was just Amy. At first, she waited inside. She told herself it was a silly accident. Maybe the old ladder by the shed fell again. But 10 minutes passed. 15. Nothing. She grabbed her coat and stepped out into the snow. The barn door was wide open. Inside, Michael's flashlight lay on the floor, still on, casting a spinning, dizzy glow where it had rolled. She saw footprints. 4 sets. They led toward the far corner of the barn, where old crates were stacked in a haphazard wall, and behind those crates she heard breathing. Slow, wet, wrong. She called Michael's name, then Harold's, then Denise's. No answer, just more breathing. She backed out, took out her phone to call 911. But then something moved behind the crates, something heavy enough to shift the wood. Her voice broke as she said this. "I ran. I didn't look back." She'd run so hard she'd lost her coat. Her shoes had slipped off in the snow. She didn't stop until she reached the main road, and someone driving home from church spotted her and brought her to the station. Karen felt that familiar prickling dread she only ever got during missing persons calls. Something wasn't right. Something was deeply, fatally wrong. Sheriff Doyle called for backup and told Amy she needed to stay put. When Karen stepped back outside into the icy air with the 2 other deputies, the wind sliced at her face like tiny razors. They drove the 3 miles to the Wallace property in silence. The house looked peaceful from the outside. Christmas lights glowed on the porch. A candle flickered in the kitchen window, but the barn door swayed open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Inside, Karen found the flashlight immediately. She also saw the footprints in the dirt. But something else caught her eye, something that made her swallow hard. There were drag marks leading into the darkness. "Michael," she called. "Harold, Denise." Only silence. They moved toward the crates, weapons drawn. As they circled behind them, Karen felt an electric jolt of fear. The space behind the crates was empty. No bodies. No signs of a struggle except those awful tracks. But the far wall of the barn, an old plank wall with faded paint, was covered in symbols, dozens of them, scratched deep into the wood as though with fingernails, circles, spirals, something that almost looked like a human figure hanging upside down, and something else, a rope hung from a high beam, swaying slightly. The end was frayed as if something had been removed from it. One deputy whispered, "Jesus Christ." But Karen's flashlight beam moved toward the ground where she saw something half buried in hay. A hand. She choked on her breath and knelt. It wasn't severed. It was attached to an arm. And the arm was attached to Michael Wallace, sprawled on his side with eyes open wide, pupils blown, face pale. But he was breathing. Shallow, barely there breaths that rattled faintly. "Call EMTs," Karen yelled. The other deputies rushed to help, flipping Michael onto his back. His chest rose and fell rapidly now, as if waking. But when his eyes snapped toward Karen, something in them made her flinch. They weren't focused. They weren't human. They darted from side to side, as though tracking something invisible moving around the barn. And then his lips moved. "They're here," he breathed. "What do you mean?" But he began convulsing violently, choking on his own saliva. The deputies held him down until the seizure passed. His eyes rolled back, and his breathing grew shallow again. EMTs arrived within minutes and loaded him into the ambulance. Karen watched the lights streak red against the snow as they sped away. They searched for Harold and Denise for another hour before finding them both inside the old tool shed, sitting upright against the far wall. They weren't bound. They weren't injured. Their eyes were open. They appeared fully conscious, but they wouldn't speak. Not when spoken to. Not when moved. Not when flashlights were shined in their eyes. They just stared straight ahead, breathing in slow, unnatural unison like synchronized swimmers. A doctor later described them as responsive but absent, though Karen could think of a better term, hollow. Back at the station, Karen found Amy curled in a blanket. She stood when Karen entered. "Did you find them?" Karen hesitated. "We found all three, but something's wrong with them. We need you to come to the hospital." Amy's face crumpled. She nodded. But when they arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, the air felt instantly wrong. Nurses ran down the hall. An alarm echoed from Michael's room. A doctor emerged, pale as ash. "He woke up," the doctor whispered, "and then he attacked the nurse and ran. We think he's still in the building." Amy screamed her husband's name while Karen and other officers swept the corridors. They found him in the pediatric wing, standing in the dim light of a Christmas tree. The tree blinked with soft-colored bulbs, throwing strange patterns across his face. He was whispering something, repeating it. "Cold barn, cold barn, cold barn." He didn't look up until Amy called his name. His head jerked toward her. His eyes lit up, too intensely. Karen felt her chest tighten. There was something predatory in that gaze, something completely foreign to the loving schoolteacher she'd seen in dozens of community events over the years. He opened his mouth as if to shout, but instead he collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, screaming in agony. Then he stopped breathing, completely. Doctors tried for 20 minutes to revive him, but there was no pulse. He was declared dead at 1:42 a.m. Amy collapsed in Karen's arms, sobbing so hard her body shook. Harold and Denise were transferred to a psychiatric facility for observation. They never recovered speech, never recognized anyone again. They remained trapped in that vacant trance. The Wallace barn was investigated thoroughly. No toxins, no carbon monoxide, nothing environmental, no signs of an intruder, no footprints besides the families and the deputies. But the symbols on the wall, those were never explained. Not by historians, not by psychologists, not by anyone. Within a month, the barn was burned down by an unknown arsonist. Some believed it was kids. Others whispered that it was someone who knew the truth, someone who wanted whatever lived in that barn gone for good. But even after the barn was gone, some drivers swear that if you pass the Wallace property late on a snowy winter night, you can see shadows moving where the barn once stood. And some nights, if the wind is cold enough and the sky clear enough, you can hear whispering from the empty field a slow, rhythmic chant, "Cold barn, cold barn, cold barn." Story the end. I never wanted to tell this story because every time I do, someone asks me why I didn't leave sooner. The answer is simple and ugly. I didn't understand what I was seeing until it was far too late. Christmas has a way of blinding you. You want warmth, lights, routine, something familiar. You want to believe that bad things take holidays off. In December of 2012, I was a deputy sheriff in a rural county in northern Michigan. Snow came early that year and never really stopped, the kind that muffles sound and makes the woods feel closer than they should. I'd grown up there, knew every back road, every farmhouse with a sagging porch and a rusted mailbox. Most Christmas calls were domestic disputes, drunk driving, or welfare checks on elderly folks who hadn't been seen in a while. Nothing prepares you for the one that rewires your brain. On December 23rd, just after 6 p.m., dispatch sent me to a welfare check on a place outside a town so small it didn't even have a stoplight. The caller was a woman from downstate who said she hadn't heard from her sister in 3 weeks. The sister, Margaret Cole, lived alone on a wooded property and was known to be private. That word gets people killed. The driveway was unplowed, which was unusual for Margaret. According to the caller, she was meticulous, the kind of person who shoveled during snowfall. I parked at the road and walked in, my boots crunching loud in the cold. The house was dark except for a faint glow in one window. Christmas lights hung on the eaves, still lit, blinking red and green in a slow, steady rhythm. I knocked. No answer. I announced myself. Nothing. The door was unlocked. The smell hit me first. Not decomposition. Something worse. Old meat and pine cleaner, mixed with the metallic tang of blood that had been scrubbed but not erased. Christmas music was playing somewhere in the house, low and warped, like a tape left in the sun too long. Bing Crosby's voice dragged, slowed, almost mournful. Margaret was sitting in a chair in the living room, facing the window. She was dressed in a red sweater with reindeer stitched across the front. Her eyes were open. Her throat was cut so clean it looked surgical. Blood had soaked into the carpet beneath her, dark and stiff. I radioed it in and started my sweep, adrenaline doing that thing where everything feels too sharp and too quiet at the same time. That's when I saw the tree. It was a full 8-foot fir in the corner of the room, or at least it had been. The branches were bare, stripped clean. Hanging from nails and hooks were ornaments that weren't ornaments at all. Fingers, teeth, chunks of bone polished smooth. Someone had taken the time to drill small holes through them, stringing them with red thread. At the top of the tree was a skull, human, the jaw wired shut, a red Santa hat pulled down over it, the white pom-pom dangling between empty eye sockets. Under the tree were gifts, wrapped neatly in festive paper. Each tag had a name written in careful cursive. Margaret, Susan, David. Names I didn't recognize yet. I don't remember backing out of that house. I remember the cold air burning my lungs and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Backup arrived fast. State Police, CSI. The house became a hive of movement, voices low, careful. We found more bodies in the basement. 3 of them, all adults, all dressed in Christmas clothes, all missing pieces. Margaret's sister was one of them. The official story that made the papers was simple. A drifter with mental illness, a break-in gone wrong. The ornaments were labeled trophies. The skull was symbolic. They arrested a man named Thomas Reed 2 days later in a motel near the highway. He had cuts on his hands, blood under his fingernails, and a bag full of bones in his trunk. Case closed. Except it wasn't. I was one of the deputies assigned to guard Reed while he was held in the county jail awaiting transfer. Christmas Eve night, snow coming down hard, the jail quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Reed sat on his bunk, humming along to a song only he could hear. When I walked past his cell, he looked up and smiled at me. "You like the tree?" he asked. I stopped. Protocol says you don't engage, but something about his eyes made my skin crawl. They were calm, content. "You missed one," he said. "Missed what?" I asked before I could stop myself. He tilted his head. "The best ornament." I reported it, of course. Logged the interaction. Slept badly. On Christmas morning, I got a call that Reed had tried to hang himself with his bedsheet. They saved him, but he was unresponsive, brain damage likely. He never spoke again. They transferred him out. The case files were sealed due to the sensitivity of the evidence. Life went on. I told myself that evil had been contained, cataloged, boxed up. 3 years later, I moved to Ohio. New department, new routines. I didn't decorate for Christmas anymore. My wife thought it was a quirk. I let her. On December 20th, 2016, my new precinct got a call from a suburban neighborhood outside Columbus. Welfare check, single mother, 2 kids, no contact for over a week. When they found the house, it looked like something out of a catalog. Lights, wreaths, inflatable snowman in the yard. Inside, the living room tree was stripped bare. The responding officer called me because of my past experience. When I arrived, I knew before I crossed the threshold. The smell was the same. The music, the meticulous placement. There were 4 bodies. The mother and children posed on the couch like they were watching TV. In the kitchen, hanging from a hook where a wreath should have been, was a human heart wrapped in tinsel. In the basement, they found a small tree made of sticks nailed together. On it hung ornaments carved from bone. Each had a date etched into it. December 2012. December 2016. This time, there was no suspect, no drifter, no easy answer. The FBI got involved. Behavioral analysts talked about copycats and internet forums and mythologizing violence. They didn't like it when I pointed out that the handwriting on the gift tags matched the handwriting from Margaret Cole's house exactly. "You're seeing patterns because of trauma," one of them told me. On Christmas Eve, I received a package at my front door. No return address. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with red thread. Inside was an ornament. It was a finger bone, polished smooth. A small hole drilled through one end. Attached was a tag. It had my name on it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with my service weapon, the house dark. At 2:14 a.m., the Christmas lights my wife had insisted on putting up flickered on by themselves. Red, green, red, green. The music started next, soft at first, a carol drifting up from the basement. I cleared the house room by room. The basement door was locked from the inside. Behind it, something scraped, slow, deliberate. I called it in. Units responded. They broke the door down. The basement was empty, except for the tree. It was taller than the others, built from 2x4s bolted together, branches of wire and nails protruding at odd angles. Hanging from it were ornaments I recognized. Margaret's finger, the mother's tooth, one of the children's ribs carved into a star. At the top of the tree was a mirror. When I looked into it, I saw myself, older, thinner, eyes hollow, a red Santa hat pulled down over my head. Behind me, reflected faintly, was a man in a jail uniform, smiling. They never found him. They never found how he got into my house or how he built that thing without anyone noticing. The ornament they sent me was the only piece of physical evidence that didn't disappear. Every Christmas since, there's been another house, another tree, another set of names, different states, same details, same handwriting. The FBI stopped returning my calls last year. I don't put up lights. I don't play music. I don't open packages I'm not expecting. And every year on Christmas Eve at exactly 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. It's always the same. "Merry Christmas, you're almost done." Story the end. The year it happened, Christmas came down hard and early, the way it sometimes does in the Midwest, with a cold that didn't feel natural. The temperature dropped so fast the ground cracked, and the snow that fell wasn't soft or clean. It came down in heavy sheets, wet at first, then froze solid by nightfall. I was 32, recently divorced, and driving from Chicago to my parents' old farmhouse in northern Indiana to clear it out for sale. My father had died in October, my mother years before that, and the house had been sitting empty since the funeral. I kept putting it off until my brother told me he couldn't handle it emotionally and asked me to go alone. The radio kept cutting out as I drove past long stretches of cornfields turned white and dead. Every few miles, the announcer broke in with warnings about black ice and stranded motorists. I remember thinking that if anything happened, no one would find me until morning. My phone showed one bar, then none. By the time I turned onto the county road leading to the house, it was already dark, and the snowplow hadn't been through. The driveway was drifted over, so I parked by the road and walked the rest of the way, dragging my suitcase behind me. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch light was out, and the windows were black. Someone had put up a string of Christmas lights along the gutter years ago and never taken them down. Half of them were broken and the rest flickered weakly when I flipped the breaker inside. I stood there in my coat for a long time, listening to the wind rake across the fields, telling myself to breathe. The first night, nothing happened. I slept on the couch with my boots on and the lights blazing. The furnace worked, but it made a banging noise that echoed through the vents like footsteps. I dreamed of my father standing at the end of the hall, his face turned away, humming Silent Night off key. When I woke up, the house smelled faintly of pine, even though there wasn't a tree. In the morning, I started sorting through things. My parents had been the kind of people who never threw anything away. Old Christmas cards from the 1970s, broken ornaments wrapped in newspaper, VHS tapes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. In the back of a hall closet, I found a cardboard box sealed with duct tape. On top, written in marker, was a single word: don't. I laughed, a short, nervous sound, and told myself it was probably some joke between my parents. Inside were photographs, Polaroids mostly, curled at the edges. They showed the front yard in winter, the same porch and bare trees, taken from different angles. In every picture, there was someone standing at the edge of the frame, a man in a red coat, a white beard, a Santa hat pulled low over his eyes. At first, I thought it was my father playing a prank. Then I noticed the dates written on the back of the photos: December 24th, December 25th. Year after year, stretching back to before I was born. In the bottom of the box was a spiral notebook. My mother's handwriting filled the pages, tight and shaky. She wrote about noises outside at night, footprints in the snow, leading up to the windows and stopping, presents left on the porch that no one had bought. One entry, dated December 26th, 1983, made my stomach drop. He came into the house last night, she wrote. We heard the bells first. I remembered the bells. Every Christmas Eve, my father would hang a string of old brass sleigh bells on the doorknob for decoration. I'd forgotten about that. That afternoon, the snow started again. Thick, heavy flakes that erased the world beyond the windows. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that grief was messing with my head. Still, when it got dark, I checked the locks twice and moved the couch closer to the hallway so I could see the front door. Around midnight, I heard it. A soft, jingling sound, distant at first. Bells. I froze, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The sound grew louder, closer, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on snow. I told myself it was the wind, that it was some animal, anything but what my mind was screaming. Then something heavy thudded against the front door. I didn't move. I couldn't. The bells jingled again, right on the other side of the wood. A man's voice, low and hoarse, called my name. He sounded amused, like he was smiling. Open up, he said. I've got something for you. I don't know how long I sat there before the sound stopped. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke up, the house was quiet. Morning light filtered through the windows, gray and weak. I told myself I dreamed it. The footprints were real. They circled the house, deep and deliberate, stopping at every window. At the front door, something had been set down. A present, wrapped in brown paper and tied with red twine. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was heavy. Inside was one of my childhood toys. A stuffed bear I'd lost when I was 6. Its fur was matted and dirty, and something dark stained its belly. A tag was tied around its neck. In shaky letters it read, "You left this behind." I packed my suitcase in a panic. I didn't care about the house anymore. I just wanted to leave. But when I opened the front door, the road was gone. Snowdrifts rose where the driveway should have been, taller than me, solid as walls. My car was buried to the windows. I tried calling for help. No signal. The radio only hissed. By nightfall, the snow was still coming down and the temperature had dropped again. I barricaded the doors with furniture and dragged the old rifle out of the hall closet even though I didn't know if it worked. That night, the bells came earlier. They rang from the back of the house this time, moving slowly, methodically. I heard the scrape of something heavy against the siding. A laugh, wet and breathy. The kitchen window shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting. He stepped through the broken frame like it was nothing, brushing snow from his coat. Up close, the Santa suit was filthy. The red fabric darkened with old stains. His beard was yellowed and stiff, his eyes small and bright. He smelled like rot and pine sap. "You weren't supposed to come back," he said, tilting his head. "Your parents understood the rules." I raised the rifle, my finger slipping on the trigger. He laughed again and took a step closer. The bells around his waist jingled cheerfully. "They fed me," he said. "Kept me warm, gave me gifts." Images from my mother's notebook flashed through my mind. Missing pets, neighbors who moved away suddenly. The year my little sister was stillborn, 2 days after Christmas. I pulled the trigger. The rifle clicked uselessly. He moved faster than I thought possible. One moment he was across the room, the next he was right in front of me, his breath hot and foul on my face. His hand closed around my wrist, crushing it. "Shh," he said softly. "It's Christmas." I don't remember how I got away. I remember pain, the sound of my own screaming, the world narrowing to a single desperate need to survive. I remember crawling through the snow, my hands numb, my blood steaming in the cold. When I woke up, it was morning, and I was lying by the side of the county road. A plow driver stood over me, his face pale and shocked. He kept asking where I'd come from, why I was barefoot, why there were footprints all around me that didn't match mine. The house burned down that night. Electrical fire, they said. Nothing left but ash and twisted metal. No bodies found. Every year since, on Christmas Eve, I hear bells outside my apartment door. Sometimes there's a present waiting in the hall. I never open them. I never move. Because I know he remembers me. Story. The end. I never believed the phrase true story meant much until the winter of 1998, when I learned how easily something real can be buried under decorations and carols. I was 27, living in a small rental house outside of Dayton, Ohio, working night shifts at a printing plant. Christmas had always been background noise to me. Lights on porches, Bing Crosby on the radio, the smell of pine drifting from the grocery store parking lot. That year, though, Christmas became something else entirely. Something that followed me into my sleep and still wakes me when the air gets cold. The house I rented was cheap for a reason. It sat at the edge of a development that never quite filled in, the last street before the woods began. The landlord told me the previous tenant had moved suddenly, which I took to mean a divorce or a job transfer. I didn't ask questions. I needed a place I could afford, and the house was quiet. Too quiet in hindsight. On December 20th, the snow came down heavy and wet, coating the road and swallowing sound. I remember that night clearly because the power flickered while I was microwaving leftovers. The lights dimmed, then came back. When I looked out the front window, I noticed something odd. A single set of footprints in the fresh snow leading from the road to my front porch. They stopped right at the door. I opened it, expecting a flyer or a package. There was nothing there. No box, no envelope, just the footprints, already filling with snow. I told myself it was a neighbor, maybe someone lost, and shut the door. That was the first mistake. The next morning, December 21st, I found a small gift sitting on the porch. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. No tag. I almost didn't pick it up. Something about it felt wrong, like touching it would make me complicit in something I didn't understand. But curiosity won. Inside was a snow globe, cheap plastic base, a little church inside with yellow painted windows. When I shook it, the flakes fell slowly, unnaturally slow, like they were suspended in syrup. I laughed it off and put it on the shelf. People do weird things around Christmas. That night at work, one of the guys mentioned the storm had knocked out power in the older neighborhoods. He joked about freezing ghosts. I smiled and went back to my machine. When I got home around 3 a.m., the house was dark. I stepped inside and froze. The snow globe was sitting on the kitchen table, right in the center. I knew I'd left it on the shelf. I stood there for a long time, listening. The house made its usual noises, the tick of cooling pipes, the hum of the fridge, nothing else. I moved the globe back to the shelf and went to bed with the lights on. On December 22nd, another gift appeared. This one was heavier. Inside was a VHS tape with no label. I didn't own a VCR, but the house came with one built into the TV cabinet, probably left behind by the previous tenant. The tape felt warm in my hand, which didn't make sense given the temperature outside. I told myself not to watch it. I told myself a lot of things that week. That night, after pacing the living room for an hour, I put the tape in. The screen filled with static, then cleared to show my house. Not a recording from the street, but from inside. The camera moved slowly through the rooms, pausing on details. The dent in the wall near the stairs, the stain on the carpet I hadn't bothered to clean. Then it stopped in front of the bedroom door. The door opened. I slammed the power button. The TV went dark, but the image stayed burned into my eyes. I didn't sleep. On December 23rd, I called my landlord. He didn't answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I drove to his office only to find a handwritten sign taped to the door. Closed for the holidays. That afternoon, I went into the woods behind the house, hoping the cold air would clear my head. About 50 yards in, I found a small clearing. In the center was a Christmas tree. It wasn't decorated traditionally. Instead of ornaments, there were photographs pinned to the branches. They were pictures of me. Some were recent, me walking to my car, me unlocking the front door. Others were older. High school, college. A photo of my parents' house taken from across the street years ago. My stomach dropped when I saw one of my mothers standing in the kitchen, unaware she was being watched. I ran. I don't remember making it back to the house, just the sound of my own breathing and the branches clawing at my jacket. When I reached the porch, there was another gift waiting. This one was a shoebox. Inside were my mother's oven mitts. I drove to her house immediately. She lived 2 hours away, and by the time I got there, it was dark. She was fine, confused but unharmed. I didn't tell her everything. I said I was worried, that I wanted to spend Christmas with her. She laughed and said, of course. That night, as we sat watching TV, the phone rang. The caller ID showed my own number. I didn't answer. On Christmas Eve, the snow started again. Heavy, relentless. The roads closed. We were stuck. My mother was cheerful, humming as she baked cookies, oblivious to the dread coiling tighter in my chest with every passing hour. At 11:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I told her to stay in the kitchen. I picked up the fireplace poker and opened the door. No one was there. Just a gift. This one was wrapped in the same brown paper. Inside was a stack of photographs. They showed the interior of my mother's house, the kitchen, the hallway, her bedroom. The last photo was of the two of us sitting on the couch, taken from behind moments earlier. The lights went out. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. I screamed for my mother. She screamed back. The figure that emerged from the darkness was tall and thin, wearing a Santa suit that hung off his frame like a skin. The beard was matted, the red stained dark. His eyes were wrong, too focused, too aware. He spoke my name like he'd been practicing it for years. I don't remember the fight clearly. I remember the smell, sweat and rot and something metallic. I remember the sound of the poker connecting with bone. I remember my mother pulling the lamp cord and the room flooding with light. The man collapsed. Blood pooled on the carpet, spreading toward the tree in the corner. The police came. The storm cleared just enough for them to reach us. They took the man away on a stretcher, still breathing, still smiling. They found his house in the woods behind my rental. Inside were walls covered in photographs, notes, lists. My name was written over and over, surrounded by dates going back decades. He'd been following me since I was a child, since a Christmas parade where I'd waved at him from the sidewalk. He died in custody before trial. Heart failure, they said. The case faded from the news. People moved on. I did too, or tried to. I moved, changed jobs, stopped celebrating Christmas altogether. I thought time would dull the memory. Last year, on December 20th, I found a gift on my porch. Brown paper, red string. Inside was a snow globe. When I shook it, the flakes fell slowly, and inside the church, the windows were lit. Story the end.